What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Shikamaru know about Naruto biggest secret? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Mendokusei ne. That simple sentence was all Shikamaru needed in his life, period. Quoting Shikamaru in one of his normal days, everything was troublesome. Waking up from his comfortable bed, with an entire day in front of him, was troublesome. Preparing breakfast for himself since his father was usually already out by that time, was troublesome. Walking down the street, waving at people who greeted him was troublesome. Training with his team was troublesome more than anything else, really, and walking back towards his house in the evening was troublesome. That last part was understandable, since his house sounded a little too empty for him. Shikamaru liked the silence, he cherished it, one of the few things that he really appreciated, but during the week his family was busy with missions for the Hokage, and even though it was a bit troublesome, sometimes he just wished he could see them more often, like when he was still at the academy. When he was little, he would go back home around 3 o'clock, after spending some hours gazing lazily at the clouds from his favorite spot. This was his hobby and he liked it. And his mother would greet him, cooking something for him. It didn't matter she was a bit bossy, because she still loved him, and Shikamaru liked to see her wave at him with a warm smile, then sit with him at the table, watching him eat. Not that she didn't smile now, but she was a kunoichi of Konohagakure, and after the problems the village had with Orochimaru and the Chunin exams, she'd been receiving more missions, coming back home late, or not coming at all. His father had been receiving more missions too, and though he hadn't been at home that much even before, it was hard for Shikamaru to see him. His last resort was linger outside, spending all his free afternoons gazing up at the clouds, thinking, which was his second hobby. Feeling the grass under his back, staring up at the sky, relaxed and comfortable, allowing his mind to work furiously while the rest of his body was still. And if he felt a bit alone, he could just shift closer to the village, listening half-heartedly to the chit-chat of the people. Opposite to his house, where he felt alone, there was no sky to look up at without the restraints of the walls, there were no familiar noises except his TV. Silence was way too heavy for him to stand. He missed his childhood, but he knew how to let go. He was growing up and he was a shinobi, which meant he should not miss something trivial as a family reunited around a table. But even now, with his brains and his intelligence, his heart still ached for that sometimes. He ignored the feeling pretty well, because he was able to take care of himself, and truth to be told, he really didn't mind spending some time with his teammates. Or hanging around with his friends. People used to say he was lazy, and he couldn't but agree with them on this. He was intelligent, his IQ was very high, so high it could put to shame any genius if he wanted. Though, his intelligence permitted him to think in ways few could, and reach conclusions he didn't like. But he liked to think. Observing around and finding nothing interesting, because he could learn everything so easily he tired himself out, not able to force himself to care. He was aware that intelligence without will was nothing. After all, he was labeled a genius for something, but he cared nothing at all. That was troublesome, but there was something that clearly put him in the same level of everyone else, and it was his age. He was young and inexperienced, and no intelligence could overrule such thing. Sure, lately troubles were gathering on Konoha pretty fast, attracting dangers and enemies so strong he had a hard time remaining indifferent on that matter. Wishing he could disappear or return a genin, when everything was so much simpler than now. Being a Chunin raised of a notch the probability to fall deeper in the troublesome life he was trying desperately to avoid. He could not forget his first mission, where he had to put aside his laziness or his friends would die. After all, trying to rescue a wannabe nuke nin was not an easy feat. He'd been forced to take life or death decisions involving people he cared for, protecting them, trying to find the right choice, without knowing if he would fail or succeed. If this was the life he was supposed to do every single day, he didn't want it. In the end, surprisingly enough, his mission was deemed a success, and not thanks to him. Sasuke was back in Konohagakure, and was being treated by the medic nins, together with the rest of the team. Whilst he came out of it almost unscathed. A few scratched, but not enough to quell his guilt. It wasn't fair. He was standing outside of the when inside his friends were dealing with their wounds, whilst he was okay. Choji ended up consuming almost all his chakra and his reserves, succeeding in winning his personal battle but at a high cost. Shikamaru was sure no one would call him useless anymore, since he'd showed everyone his strength. Kiba had been injured badly, and his dog Akamaru was in an even worse condition, since both fought fiercely without restraints, giving everything they had, and winning. Neji, the Hyuga, ended up worse than anyone else, barely alive when the rescuing troops arrived where he'd fought. His healing was the most complicated, and hard to accomplish due to his injuries, and he needed constant care. They all fought valiantly, managing to win against all odds. Luckily enough, the medics had reported him his friends were all fine, and would recover if given time, and now what he really wanted was some time for himself to calm down. The news of Uchiha Sasuke's defection hadn't reached the villagers' ears yet, and by what he suspected, they would never spread around, not even within the shinobi. Naruto had taken him back, just as he'd promised. Of all the rescuing team, Naruto was the only one Shikamaru knew nothing about. He wasn't there when the blonde arrived with Sasuke, and he was still under Tsunade's care. The Hokage was doing wonders for the boy. Right now Shikamaru was far away from the hospital, gazing up at the cloudy sky, effectively ignoring the raging emotions inside him, because he was aware he could not deal with them at the moment. Not before he could see his friends. Not before he could apologize to them for his carelessness. He had been a horrible leader, he hadn't helped them. He was weak and useless. If only the Uchiha could have realized his acting before trying to escape, nothing would have happened. Naruto wouldn't have been hurt, no one would have. Everything would be just as fine as before. Shikamaru did not know why Sasuke decided to defect to Orochimaru, but whatever it was, it had to be important to have the last Uchiha of Konoha leave his village for one of the strongest shinobi ever lived. The lazy Nara had never cared to find out why Sasuke was so cold and distant, but right now he had the feeling that he could turn everything around his reasons to leave. Maybe it was time to forget his laziness for a moment and start gathering some information. To have friends is so troublesome, he sighed inwardly. Blue eyes flickered open, at first seeing nothing but a blurred white, pink, yellow and black. Then, they started to focus on a face above him, the world suddenly becoming clearer. Naruto, how are you feeling? A soft voice spoke, and he felt a soft touch on his left cheek. It took him a moment to realize it was a hand. It was warm, and it was soothing, and it felt nice. Brown eyes looked down at him. Tsunade, Obaa-chan? He rasped, his voice rough and strained. His throat hurt. He felt like in a daze. He couldn't remember where he was, or what had happened, but the smiling face of the Godem looking down at him calmed his raging emotions enough for him to clear his troubled mind. He remembered the mission. Parts of his memories flashed in front of him. He had been teamed up with some friends, to rescue Sasuke. Sasuke. Where is Sasuke? He jumped up in a sitting position, eyes wide, breath erratic, and felt a jolt of pain coming from his body, making his cringe and fall forwards with a flinch. Calm down, Naruto. Tsunade's voice was still calm and collected as she pushed him back down, causing him to wince from the pain. It's all okay. Sasuke is here, you did it, you brought him back. Naruto flopped back on the mattress, sighing as his injuries protested and ached. All the rest was forgotten, he brought back Sasuke. He did it. Closing his eyes, he let the memories from the fight come back to him. He remembered Sasuke transforming into that creepy version of himself with the help of the seal Orochimaru left on his body. He remembered what he told him, that he considered him a brother. And he remembered that Sasuke had wanted to kill him. It was all so clear. But, start flashback. He had failed. The last attack between full-powered Chidori and Rasengan had caused an explosion of chakra and power that could be seen in the distance. Two fierce attacks clashing against each other with all the strength both boys had in their bodies, one caused by despair and need of vengeance, the other by friendship. When the clouds of dust dissipated in the air, revealing a bare ground of crumbled rocks, there was a deep silence. It seemed as if the whole world had been covered with a thick blanket of calm, almost unreal, silence, so heavy even breathing was hard, echoing around like a shout. In the middle of the Valley of End, two frames were recognizable by standing there, one on his feet, the other on the ground, unmoving. Clear, deep blue eyes glazed up from the ground to stare into deep, crimson ones, the red color of blood flickering and moving inside them as if it was a burning flame. His body had changed back from the inhuman shape the curse allowed him to his normal one, his chakra consumed completely with the strain of the last attack, leaving him panting and weak. But he wasn't the only one. Naruto was the one that could not stand again. Using so much of Kyuubi's chakra caused his body to collapse, and he was sliding in and out of consciousness. The strange red aura around him was gone. His eyes had returned to his usual blue. The whiskers on his cheeks dimmed to their normal appearance. He'd failed. Sasuke was still standing. He was not. He can kill me now. I deserve it. I wasn't able to take him back, was what Naruto thought in that moment. And still, as his blue eyes met with the Sharingan crimson ones, he could not see the same emotion burning in them that he had seen before, when their battle started. Sasuke was just standing, looking at him, and did not speak. How could he manage to stand up was a mystery to Naruto, who knew he couldn't even move a finger in his current situation. Why? It was barely a whisper. So low, the blonde wouldn't have heard it if not for his enhanced hearing and the deathly silence around them. But he did, and felt despair inside. Why were you so eager to take me back? Why did you keep on fighting back, when all I wanted was kill you? Sasuke's Sharingan faded away. Black orbs were now boring into ocean ones, probing for an answer, even if it would be the same as before. You are, my friend, Naruto replied. His voice was rough and his throat hurt a lot. Probably some blow damaged him there, but he didn't care. I tried to kill you, Sasuke replied. Maybe even too quietly, with no coldness nor rage. He simply stated a fact. Because that way, I can kill him, he added in a murmur. Naruto never looked away from Sasuke, as he let a small bitter smile grace his lips. It didn't matter, he knew Sasuke was referring to Itachi, his brother. He heard Kakashi speak about his clan with others. He knew what the older Uchiha did, simply to test himself. Sasuke was all that was left of the clan, and all he wanted was revenge. He was left alive because of that revenge. Itachi left him alive because that way, he would create an opponent at his level, or create someone like him. Sasuke, I can't let you waste your life. If something can be said about Naruto, was that he would never give up on something he cared for. He cared for Sasuke, and he knew what he was feeling. The burning emotion coursing inside him was proof of that. He would never let him go, not now that the raven-haired one admitted Naruto was his best friend. Not now that finally, Naruto found a family. Iruka-sensei, Sasuke, like a father, like a brother. He couldn't renounce to them in the name of a stupid revenge. Call him selfish, but he was not ready to lose something close to him. How can you not understand, Sasuke? His voice was a little steadier, even if he was close to fainting for the loss of blood and chakra. But he would not give up. Never. If you give up on everything you have, what will be left for you when you finally accomplish your vengeance? He coughed and a trail of blood seeped out of a corner of his mouth. And if someone else kills Itachi instead of you, what will you become? You would have wasted your life away. How can you understand what I feel? How can you know what it feels like? You have no family, you never had one. Anger filled the charcoal eyes, but not hatred. All left to me is revenge. He made sure of that. But now you have me, Sasuke. And Sakura-chan, and Kakashi-sensei. You are not alone, we can be your family as you can be mine. Naruto smiled a shaky, weak foxy grin up at him. I never had a family, that's true, but I can understand you better than anyone would. A moment of silence, not even the wind was blowing. I know how it feels to be truly alone, that's why. I can't let you go, not now that I started to feel alone no more, Naruto blinked. He couldn't feel any chakra in him. Kyuubi was nowhere in his mind. He knew the fox was hurt, because merging with his chakra caused a reaction in the seal. He had no strength left, but he had to find some. If not from the kitsune, then from his own stubbornness. Orochimaru will use you. Are you up to be controlled only to gain a power that is not your own? A power that you don't have. Something that will burn you from the inside, making you his puppet, a power that you can't claim as yours? Naruto twitched his fingers. All his body hurt. He could barely keep conscious, but he would never give up. And astonishingly, he started to shift to stand up. Sasuke stared in deep shock as his blonde rival, and now admittedly friend, struggled to shift in a sitting position, breathing hard, more blood coming out of his mouth, but he didn't stop. It's a curse. Sasuke stepped back, faltering so only his own willpower was keeping him standing. He wanted to ignore Naruto's attempts to stand, he didn't want to look, he didn't want to listen to him at all. I was cursed. I can't have freedom if I don't kill him and revenge my clan. Then, stay, you don't want to use a power that is not your own to defeat Itachi, don't you? Naruto smiled again, warmly. You would feel unsatisfied, because really, it wouldn't be you the one to defeat Itachi, but someone else's power. His voice was low and warm, as if he were speaking about the weather. Almost as if what he was saying was so obvious even a kid could understand. Stay away. Sasuke stepped back again. Naruto stepped forwards. The smile was still on his lips. Warm smile, his eyes bright and clear. There was no hatred in them, no guilt, no sadness, no regret. Naruto did not hate Sasuke because he had wanted him dead. Naruto could not hate. Looking at him, tears pooling from those ocean blue eyes, because he cared. Naruto really cared. Sasuke felt something, deep inside him. It was not pity. Naruto did not pity him, it was acceptance. Understanding. Naruto had stepped inside his shell, passing all his blocks and his defenses, and touched his heart. Because Naruto cared, and for the first time, someone treated him like a real person, not the last Uchiha heir. Someone looked at him and saw the person Sasuke, not the silent, loner Uchiha. Naruto saw through all his walls, and considered him family. A real family. He couldn't kill him. He knew he couldn't. He already knew, even before starting the fight, that he would never be able to kill Naruto. And still he had tried. Because he was blinded by the rage, the hatred, the fury, the desire to revenge his clan, his family. But now, everything was gone. There were no more raging emotions inside him to blind him. And widened eyes saw that Naruto was right. He couldn't kill Itachi with Orochimaru's seal. That would bring no satisfaction. It was Orochimaru's power, not his, he was using. He needed to be strong in a different way than his brother was. He was not a killer, he was not a genius like Itachi, but he was skilled. And stubborn. He'd been a step from taking away something precious to him, Naruto's life. He would have turned into a copy of his own brother. Naruto was shocked when Sasuke's eyes filled with tears. Never in his life he'd seen the Uchiha cry. He was always in control, he was always hiding his emotions. Sasuke. Sasuke looked at him. I'm sorry, Naruto. With that, Sasuke fell on the ground, not anymore able to sustain himself up. Naruto stood shaking, eyes widened, but when he realized what Sasuke had said, his eyes brightened up, the shadows covering them disappearing slightly as the smile returned this time, a satisfied one. Sun peered from the clouds above them, the silence still unnerving, but this time, slowly, around them the world came back to life. And Naruto felt someone approaching, calling his name. Kakashi-sensei, was his last thought before he let the darkness claim him. End flashback. Sasuke was back. It was all okay then. You should rest, Naruto, it seems like your body isn't healing like it should. Tsunade's voice shook him out of his thoughts. Can you tell me what happened? How are the others? Naruto looked at the woman with expectant eyes. Are they okay? Tsunade sighed. She knew she would get nothing from Naruto unless he first told him about his friends. Choji, Neji and Kiba are fine. They were in a bad condition but were healed by our best medic Nins. They are up to recover shortly. Tsunade saw Naruto's shoulders relax a little and smiled. He had been worried for them. What about Shikamaru? Naruto asked, wondering why she hadn't mentioned him. He was fine, he got away with only a few scratches. Sasuke is also fine, he's now guarded by some Anbu members, in case he decides to try and run away again. Naruto nodded. He knew it was necessary, but he didn't believe Sasuke would try and leave Konoha again. A moment of silence greeted them, and then Tsunade slowly brushed away some strands of hair from the young boy's eyes, smiling at him. She had been sickly worried for his safety, still afraid the curse of her necklace would get him if she wasn't careful. It took her brother and her lover away. She didn't want Naruto to die as well, not now that she considered him her little brother. What happened? Why isn't Kyuubi healing you like it should? She asked, pointing to the many bandages that covered his body. Some were already reddish by the blood still coming out, and that was not normal. By that time it should have healed half the damage. I used too much of Kyuubi's chakra for the battle. He. Naruto would have scratched his head but his arms hurt. Instead he smiled sheepishly at the Godem and she felt her heart warm up. Despite it all, he was still smiling in the same way. But I promised Sakura I would bring Sasuke back. I couldn't go back on my promise. Tsunade looked at him again, searching in his eyes and in the way he was smiling. Then she stood up. I'm going to check on the others, try to rest a little, okay? Naruto nodded, and then, he was left alone. All his cheerfulness slowly disappeared from his face, as he forced himself to sit up on the bed, blue eyes looking outside the window at the sight of Konoha. He was glad he could take Sasuke back, but he really didn't believe the raven-haired boy would give up on his revenge. Maybe he would train on his own instead of closing his heart away and go to Orochimaru, but Sasuke would always look up to kill Itachi. How can you understand what I feel? How can you know what it feels like? You have no family, you never had one. All left to me is revenge. He made sure of that. Sasuke's words hurt. He knew Sasuke was just angry and wasn't thinking, and that he said he was sorry afterwards, but it was true. Naruto would never understand what it felt to have a family and then have it taken away from you. Sure, he could have his friends and he could have Iruka-sensei, and he would protect them by giving his life away if needed. But how could he understand the pain Sasuke was in? Could it be enough to help him? He was not strong enough to help Sasuke out. He had been not strong enough to stop him from going away, and it didn't matter he had taken him back. He knew of Sasuke's pain, but how could he help him out? He needed to be stronger, but he was so weak. I'm sorry, he sobbed, hiding his face in his arms. Your sensei told me I was going to find you here. Shikamaru was shaken out from his thoughts by the voice of the current Hokage, Tsunade Godem. He looked away from the clouds and stared up at her, once again wondering how this woman could be as strong as Naruto assured him she was, and how could she be 50 when she looked this young? Of course he was smart enough to notice she used a medical jutsu to keep this appearance, but still, what was the point of that? Troublesome. I wanted to tell you that Naruto is awake, at the time he's the only one of the group you are allowed to visit. She smiled lightly at him, and he groaned before standing up, his stance slouched as he was used to, eyes glancing at her in boredom. His clothes were still dirty and ruined, he was still covered with scratches and dirt, and still, he looked like he didn't care. Or maybe, he was too lazy to change clothes and clean up, she assumed. This was the guy whose IQ was the highest of the whole village of Konoha. This was the Chunin that had been appointed to go retrieve Sasuke, and that had succeeded in his mission. Nara, Shikamaru, lead the way, he said. She did not care he hadn't used any courtesy in asking her, nor if he had plainly ordered her to take him to his friend. She'd seen enough of him in the 2 brief meetings they had to trace his character down to the minimum detail. Tsunade-sama, he spoke quietly as the 2 of them walked up to the hospital area. I was thinking, can I ask you something? What is it? She replied, not looking at him as she led the way through the corridors. For the level of the mission and the members on the team there were different conditions. Shikamaru stared up at her, his usual grimace back in place. For such a team, shouldn't we have been assigned at least a medical ninja? She expected such a question from him, and had to stifle a smirk, before explaining to the young one that medical ninja were hard to train. He of course understood the general meaning, but her last words left him confused. Also it is, the most important thing, that makes a first-class medical ninja. She then smiled knowingly. The most important thing? Shikamaru grimaced, what a troublesome woman, he thought. You go ahead to Naruto's room. Tsunade waved at him and walked away, pointing to the corridor at his left. I'll come after I pick up the medicine. He thought of rolling his eyes but found it too troublesome, so he just stepped down the corridor and was about to enter the room. The door was open when he heard sobs coming from inside. He peered in, and was greeted with the sight of Naruto curled up on the bed, body completely wrapped in bandages, sobbing with his face in his arms, his frame shaking as he could not control his tears. Shikamaru did not speak, just stood there, quietly observing Naruto as the blonde murmured something he could not quite understand, over and over. He was almost sure he heard a sorry and a weak here and there, but he may have been wrong. Naruto looked really broken now. And alone, Shikamaru exited and slowly made his way down the corridor again, silently. Before turning and making sure he was being noisy, he walked again to the room, knowing he had to give Naruto warning that he was coming. Naruto heard someone was coming his way and hurriedly wiped away the tears, hoping his cheeks would not be red. He cleared his throat when on the door appeared a well-known boy, who leaned on the doorframe and looked at him, a bored expression on his face. Well, you're awake. Naruto couldn't help but smile happily, the sight of his friend cheering him up. Shikamaru, he yelled, smiling. Shikamaru walked towards the bed, falling down onto it like he'd walked miles instead of some corridors, sighing as he opened his eyes to look at the blonde from above his shoulder. Naruto was smiling at him, completely different from the sight he had witnessed seconds before, but he did not speak about it. It was Naruto's business, not his. For a moment there was a deep silence, but Naruto didn't like it nonetheless and opened his mouth to break it. So, everyone is safe. The blonde looked down at his hands. That's good. Shikamaru nodded, and Sasuke. He's fine, Tsunade Obaa-chan said. He's guarded over. Silence fell on them again, but it was a comforting silence between friends. How are you feeling? Shikamaru surprised both by asking this. I am so troublesome at times, the black-haired boy thought. Naruto's smile returned full force, a little tired, but I am fine. And I see you are too. Shikamaru nodded before falling on his back on the bed, groaning. Mendokusei ne, he grumbled. But at least, it's done. You did great, Naruto assured. You took the right decisions. Without you I think we would have failed. Shikamaru was kinda surprised to hear such things come out from Naruto's mouth, most of all because the blonde was quiet and was not bragging around like usual. Shikamaru felt like he did not know Naruto anymore. This mission would have failed if you hadn't been there. Tsunade-sama did the right thing when she suggested me to bring you on. Shikamaru sighed and looked at the ceiling. Naruto stared at him and smiled again, this time sadly. Thanks, he murmured. Mendokusei yo, Shikamaru muttered again. What would he do without his trademark line? The scene was quite a déjà vu to Sakura, as her eyes looked down at Sasuke's sleeping form on the bed. He was looking even more pale than usual, the mark on his neck contrasting more than usual on the skin, almost taunting her, telling her she hadn't been able to help him, to keep him in Konoha. When Ino appeared before her on the bridge, tears pooling in her eyes, she had expected bad news. Instead she'd been told that Naruto and the others were back, that Sasuke was there, and all was gonna be okay. The first thing she did was cry of happiness, because Naruto kept his promise. He took Sasuke back, he did it. She believed he would, and he did. So, not even thinking about going to see Naruto, she went to Sasuke's room, guarded by 2 Anbu guards. And she was allowed in mostly because Sasuke was warded to the bed, in case he would try to run away again, and because she was crying when she asked the guards to let her in. And now, she was looking at his sleeping face, tears falling from her eyes, happiness and sadness mixing together. Her only thought was for Sasuke. He was back. Things were going to be okay, now. Nothing mattered anymore, they had Sasuke back. I feared I had lost him, she thought, her fingers slowly brushing against Sasuke's own, looking at his face in wonder, evading the sight of the seal on the neck. Then, she was shaken out of her reverie by a twitch of Sasuke's eye, and a moment later, black eyes opened. Sasuke-kun, Sakura cried. You are awake, Sasuke groaned. His eyelids felt heavy, and his whole body hurt. He could hear Sakura sobbing and speaking nonsense at his side, but he shut her voice out as he thought back to what had happened. In a flash, he remembered. And his shoulders slumped in defeat knowing he was back. Blue eyes flashed in his mind as he closed his eyes again, remembering the words Naruto spoke so passionately to him. A brother, but now you have me, Sasuke. And Sakura-chan, and Kakashi-sensei, you are not alone, we can be your family as you can be mine. I never had a family, that's true, but I can understand you better than anyone would. Naruto? Naruto was right, always right. He would never defeat Itachi, his brother, using power that was not his. He knew that he would never be satisfied this way. But he also knew he would never be able to give up with his revenge. Itachi took away his family once, he would never let him take away his new family. A family that didn't give up on him. He let his brother control his life even when he wasn't there, by fueling his anger. He knew that if he wanted to beat his brother, he would need to fight with a clear mind, not by letting his anger think in his place. That way, he would be really strong. Sasuke-kun? The worried voice of the pink-haired girl reached him and he opened his eyes again, focusing his gaze on her. Sakura was smiling at him, tears clear in her eyes, as she was happy he was there. Maybe Naruto was right. For how annoying, this was his family. Konoha was his family. Sakura, he whispered. His voice was still rough. Hearing Sasuke speak her name sent Sakura over the edge as she started squealing and blushing, before grabbing a glass of cool water and having Sasuke sip from it. He was still sealed to the bed, so she had to hold the glass against his lips. He never questioned why he was sealed to the bed. He knew he had lost the trust of almost all the ninjas, apart maybe for Naruto, Sakura and some others, but he was willing to gain it back. He needed to be strong. I am sorry I am so weak, but what can I do? I can't wait to become strong, or else I won't be able to protect the ones I care for. Naruto looked up at the ceiling, shadows covering the room. Outside, the night was hiding Konoha from view, and there was no moon to shine it up. He didn't know why, but he felt a strange sadness pooling up inside him. Like he was supposed to do something, but he couldn't understand what. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a loud crash, and he stumbled up from his bed to look outside the window, and the sight that met his eyes shocked him. There was Jiraiya sitting on the head of a really big toad, not as big as Gamabunta, but quite big of his own, in fact big enough to let Jiraiya look Naruto in the eyes even if his room was at the second floor. "Arrow Sennin," Naruto exclaimed, stunned by the unexpected sight. "Hey," the white-haired man replied, with a small smile. Naruto resumed his sitting position on the bed, watching Jiraiya sit down on the windowsill, his back turned to him. The blonde waited curiously as to why the Arrow Sennin would be visiting him, but when Jiraiya spoke, what he said shocked the guts out of him. "I came to talk to you today about an important matter," he started, still not turning to look at the young boy. "From now on, you're officially my apprentice. I will train you one-on-one for 3 years. A trickle of sweat rolled down Naruto's forehead as he looked up at his teacher with wide eyes. He couldn't believe what the old man was saying. "When I was investigating Orochimaru's immortality jutsu, information concerning Akatsuki came to light." Naruto's blue eyes passed from wide to narrow in a split second. Akatsuki, the secret not so secret anymore organization in which Uchiha Itachi, Sasuke's brother, worked. He could remember the tall man, with swirling crimson eyes, the Sharingan. He could remember the effects of his special attack on both Sasuke back when he and Jiraiya were searching for Tsunade and Kakashi-sensei. And he remembered the other one as well, the one with a shark face. His sword could absorb chakra. The Akatsuki wanted him. Well, not him, but the power he was the vessel of. "Kyuubi, information?" he asked tentatively. Jiraiya finally turned to him. "They won't be after you, for at least 3 or 4 years from now." The blonde lowered his gaze and thought about it for a moment. "Well, in that case," he raised his eyes. "I want to get strong." The white-haired pervert turned again towards him, frowning. There was a flicker in those blue eyes that he couldn't understand. "I want to be strong," Naruto repeated, determination showing on his face. "I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't be strong enough." He looked down, blonde strands covering his eyes, but his hands were trembling on his lap. "You took Sasuke back." Jiraiya's voce was soft, unlike his usual loud tone. "You were strong, Naruto." "No," blue eyes filled with unshed tears looked up to meet his. "I couldn't help Sasuke, I couldn't help him. He can't live without having his revenge, and I can't help that. Orochimaru wanted him, and I couldn't help Sasuke, I couldn't stop him from going away." Jiraiya stared at him. Unlike what happened to him many years before, Naruto managed to get Sasuke back. He couldn't help Orochimaru when it came to him. He'd fought, he had tried to convince him, but he hadn't been able to help his friend back. Orochimaru left, and he couldn't help him. Orochimaru wanted immortality and he didn't care who hurt in the process. "Kukuku, you'll always be a simple person, Jiraiya? Whatever you're thinking, it won't work. Because you aren't aware of what I was doing. You are pitiful?" A flicker of sadness passed through Jiraiya's eyes. He had let down his friend. What if Orochimaru comes again and tries to take Sasuke away? What if he kills him? Naruto gritted his teeth. He won't. Not in 3 years, at least. Jiraiya looked at the blonde. Every time Orochimaru performs his immortality jutsu, he's prevented for 3 years to do it again. While waiting impatiently for Sasuke, he transferred already. Naruto looked at him, his heart filling with hope. It was strange that both Akatsuki and Orochimaru would not appear for the same amount of time, but maybe, just maybe, he had time. "Time to become strong. Are you up to follow me then? It won't be easy, I will train you, and I am one of the 3 legendary Sannin. Are you sure you can keep up with me?" Naruto stared at Jiraiya for a moment. There was no need to say anything. The determination in those ocean pools was enough. The Arrow Sennin jumped out of the window, landing on top of the toad. "When you leave the hospital, get ready. You big fool." With that, Jiraiya grinned and left. Naruto flashed his fox grin. Asu. 3 months later. "Thanks Iruka-sensei." Naruto grinned at Iruka, who watched him with a smile. The two were at the Ichiraku ramen stand, and the Chunin had offered Naruto some ramen, knowing it would be the last time he would see him, at least for a while. It was almost heartbreaking for the schoolteacher, because Naruto had always been his favorite student, despite the fact that he was the vessel of Kyuubi. Naruto brought light wherever he went. One of his smiles could warm up just like the sun. "Watch me, Iruka-sensei. When I come back I'll be the stronger ninja of the whole Konoha." Iruka smiled even more, knowing that Naruto was not just bragging around. He was going to become strong, because Naruto was determined, and if he promised something, he would do anything to accomplish his promise. Naruto closed his eyes and flashed his sensei one of his foxy smiles, whilst looking around for the last time, knowing he would not see the village again for a long time. He had already said his goodbyes to his friends, the ones that trusted him and fought with him. The only ones he couldn't find were Shikamaru and Sasuke. 3 months passed since Naruto had taken Sasuke back to Konoha village, and in all those months he never had the chance to meet with the Uchiha heir. Not even once. Being blessed with the Kyuubi inside him meant his wounds and injuries were healed faster than normally possible, and even if it took him more than usual because that time Kyuubi had been injured as well, it was still faster than Sasuke. By the time all his wounds were healed, his friends had been visiting him for weeks. Kiba, Choji, Neji, Hinata and Shikamaru, and even Lee. They were all fine, but neither Sasuke nor Sakura came to see him. Naruto knew this was predictable. Sasuke would be uncomfortable knowing what had happened between them at the Valley of End, and would refuse to come and see him. He was too, for another reason though. How could he face Sasuke, after all, knowing he still couldn't help him overcome his desire of vengeance? He was weak, and he promised he would be stronger in order to help those who he cared for, his friends, his family, his village. He still wanted to become Hokage. He would show them all that he was strong, and would finally get respected. Sakura on the other end, he knew she had always been much to the latter's distaste at Sasuke's side, helping him recover, or maybe, stressing him even more. But now that he was going away, he felt a painful twinge in his chest seeing the girl he once had a crush on hadn't even cared enough to come and say goodbye to him. True that she was now under Tsunade Obaa-chan's training, since she had showed great skills as medical nin, but still, she didn't even come visiting him, not even once. He had known for a long time she was interested in Sasuke and not in him. Thus why his crush had diminished until it disappeared completely. But she was his friend, wasn't she? Sighing, his smirk piping down ever so lightly, he turned to Jiraiya, who had appeared on the entrance of the ramen shop, waving at him. "It's time to go," he simply said. Naruto nodded and hugged tightly Iruka, and the man hugged him back. He would miss him so much, miss the boy he had started thinking of as his. "Bye, Iruka-sensei. You'll see just how strong I'll become." And with that, he was gone. Iruka sighed, placing some money on the counter for the meal, cringing slightly seeing just how many bowls Naruto ate. Then he stood up and exited the ramen stand. "So he's gone, huh?" The voice made Iruka eep as he turned, eyes meeting a single eye, the other hidden under the hite he wore lower than others did. "Hi," he answered, sighing sadly. "I know he'll do well, but I'll miss him." Arms circled his waist as Iruka found himself pulled against Kakashi's chest. "I know you will," was the whispered reply. "I will miss this place, no matter how much the people of here despise me. I still think of this place as my home." Naruto sighed. He wanted to go train with Jiraiya, but he would miss his home. Plus, he felt somewhat restless. He hadn't still seen Shikamaru. The others wished him a goodbye. Even Shino, Kiba, Konohamaru and Hinata-chan. And he even managed to brush off the displeasure not to have seen Sakura and Sasuke, too. But, "Are you okay, Naruto?" Jiraiya looked down at him, understanding what the boy was going through. He didn't want to say goodbye to the place he'd lived in for all these years. Even if he had never been welcomed in there, he still loved it. He was just like his father. "Huh? Oh, hi, Ero Sennin." Naruto replied with his trademark grin and a nod. Anu saw, when are we going to start the training?" Jiraiya's left eye twitched. "Don't call me that, disrespectful brat. I am the great Sannin, admired and feared by many." The mighty Jiraiya. Hi, whatever you say." Naruto waved his hand dismissively. For how much the white-haired man was strong, he still was nothing more than a perverted hermit. Damn brat, Jiraiya thought. But even though he was driving him crazy most of the time, he couldn't but love Naruto and his brightness. It was almost infectious, the way his smile could break through the coldest hearts that closed themselves many years before. Naruto followed Jiraiya to the gates of the village, feeling rather excited since he was going to start a new journey. He felt a chill of anticipation as he passed the doors, the guards looking at him with perplexity mixed with disgust, but he ignored them. So you are going away, and you don't even say goodbye? How troublesome of you. Blue eyes turned to the right, sparkling with happiness, as Naruto smiled brightly at the other boy, who was leaning on the wood of the gates, crossed arms, staring at him with a bored but at the same time if possible sly face. Shikamaru. Naruto hopped to him. I couldn't find you anywhere, he pouted cutely. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. I was here. That's one of the best places to watch the clouds. Besides, that's the only way out of the village, so I knew you would pass from here. Naruto smiled at him, and then, silence fell. They just looked at each other, but it was a comfortable silence. You're too troublesome. Shikamaru glanced up at the sky. Take care. With that, he turned his back and walked inside the gates. Naruto blinked, then a smile appeared on his face, as his shoulders relaxed visibly. Yeah, you too, you lazy bum. With that, Naruto left Konoha. It was a sunny day in Konoha. The streets were filled with people talking animatedly, walking or doing their works, with a really light mood. Every now and then, a shape would pass through the streets in a flash, blurring from sight a second later. Sign a ninja was patrolling the place, or going to report their missions to the Hokage Tower. The sight was pacific, if not for the shapes that could be seen on top of the houses, silent and unmoving, looking and controlling everything minutely. They were ninja ordered to protect the village from anything that could look remotely out of place. Seeing the last few years had been dangerous and difficult. Wars were spreading through the various countries, and there had been news that Otto was growing stronger every day passing by, and that it was tying up alliances with Kirigakure. But right now, nothing seemed to dim the cheerful mood. It was a calm day. The sun was bright in the sky. There were a few clouds too, white and puffy, contrasting clearly against the blue. A mile from the center of the village, where Konoha met with the forest, there was a meadow, partially hidden by bushes, trees and such, where not a soul ever went, except one. A shape was lying down on the grass, his back propped up against a tree, his eyes closed, arms behind his head, legs sprawled in front of him. He looked like he was sleeping. At first sight, one could clearly see his body was lean but not overly so, fine muscles peered out from the shirt. A Hite-8 with the leaf symbol carved into it tied around one of the figure's arms. His hair was tied up in a high ponytail, dark strands pointing in every direction, as if trying to free themselves from the hair tie. It looked longer too. A look of boredom was clear on his features as soft, almost soundless steps alerted him someone was coming. Shikamaru? One eye opened lazily, staring up at the person that was towering over him. It was a girl, with pink, long hair, a Hite-8 tied around her head to keep the unruly brands at bay. She was wearing a midnight black sleeveless shirt and a short black skirt, both with stripes of pink at the edges, and black shoes. Her frame was the one of a girl now on her teens. It was blossoming. Her eyes were of the deepest green, and were fixed on him, looking almost angered. Oi, Shikamaru muttered, closing his eyes again. It was only Sakura. All he wanted was to go back to his peaceful slumber. It was not so much he was back from his latest mission, one that had involved retrieving a stolen scroll, and now, in his first moment of relax, someone came to bother him. How troublesome. Tsunade Shisho asked me to summon you, the girl said, shaking her head at his laziness, though she was pretty used to it. She knows you just came back, but this is really important. Shikamaru groaned up at her. Hi, Sakura. He slowly stretched, before standing up, slumping in his usual relaxed position, low shoulders and hands in the pockets. Sakura walked away towards the village, and he followed, huffing. To anyone it would have looked like slouching, something that a real ninja would never do, but a trained eye would have noticed the half-tense muscles and the way the dark eyes scanned around looking for danger. For how lazy he could be, he was still a talented shinobi. He was still a chunin, though, if he wanted, he would have been the perfect junin. It was not a matter of strength, in the end, because he was a capable ninja. The problem was that, he was lazy. He didn't want to bother himself with the junin selections. Despite what he wanted, Tsunade Hokage had stated he should get more seriously his ninja life, thus she started giving him more missions. His skills were if he bothered himself to use them just as good as any Junins. So, even if he was still a Chunin in rank, he was often assigned as team captain for the missions that required skill and a lot of mind work. When he wasn't in a mission, he was gazing up at the clouds, or walking around the village, looking for information. So yes, he hadn't changed that much. 2 years passed ever since Naruto left to follow Jiraiya in his special training journey, and still, nothing had changed, at least, not too much. Tsunade was still the Godem, and despite the first uncertainty, the villagers soon came to not just accept her, but love her. Though, and Shikamaru had noticed this in the first period, the people looked almost happier. If he hadn't been the genius he was, perhaps he would have wondered what had happened to them, but he was a genius after all. So it was not hard for his to come to the conclusion that it was because Naruto was gone. It had been unnoticed at first, but when he looked around, each passing day, at the faces of the people around him, he could see they were smiling more and more. Faithful to his previous decision to be attentive of what was around him, Shikamaru started questioning the ninja and the villagers. For the first few weeks after Naruto's departure, he had just worked around on things concerning Uchiha Sasuke, sometimes even asking questions, things that apparently had no meaning, but that to him, were really important, every time wondering if the question he was doing would get the answer he was hoping for. Then, in the end, when he was doubtful he would get any reply, he was already wishing not to have bothered in the first place. He'd heard a speech between Kakashi-sensei and Iruka-sensei that gave him not just an answer to some of his questions, but actually caused some kind of interest to sparkle within him. Start flashback. Shikamaru glared at the corridor in general, as he walked through it to report his mission to the Hokage. 2 weeks since Naruto left. It was almost curious how time was revolving around the blonde boy's departure. Shikamaru found himself counting each day as one more day after Naruto's departure. It was strange how shinobi that had known the blonde boy well, and had usually despised his loudness and foolishness, were now missing him, a lot. It was like a part of them disappeared with him that day. Even the ones that never paid attention to Naruto now were noticing how silent the village had become. How the yells and screams had once filled the streets, that now looked almost empty. Shikamaru in his lazy way missed Naruto as much as the others. It was kinda troublesome. For how much he'd loathed Naruto because he was too active and loud, now he missed him. "Ma, you should really lighten up," a voice spoke from around a corner. Shikamaru stopped. He's gone, but he's gone training with Jiraiya-sensei, and when he will return, he'll be strong enough to protect himself from the Akatsuki. But we shouldn't underestimate that organization, the other voice replied. Shikamaru knew both voices, and it took him no time to recognize one as Kakashi's and the other as Iruka's. He tensed. He knew he shouldn't be eavesdropping, but he also knew they were speaking about Naruto, and his curiosity was piqued. Silently he backed away, so the two shinobi wouldn't detect his chakra signature, and cautiously he made some hand seals, activating a spying jutsu on the two. There was no chance he was going not to be detected, unless they were too concentrated on their conversation, but Shikamaru was positive they were. After all, no one should have been in there at this time, and he himself was supposed to be still on mission. It wasn't his fault he was so fast he managed his in half the time needed. His hearing sharpened and he was able to hear fairly better what Iruka-sensei and Kakashi-sensei were saying. Naruto is strong, after all, he has Jiraiya protecting him, Kakashi reasoned. But you were right, he's no match for the Akatsuki members, and he won't even after his training. What I fear is Uchiha, Iruka murmured. Shikamaru frowned. There were many unknown factors in what the two shinobi were saying, and he didn't like when he didn't know something. It unnerved him, and this was troublesome, he added as in an afterthought. There was a small pause, maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and Shikamaru used this time to analyze what the two said, while he waited to hear more. First unknown factor Akatsuki. He never heard before of it. But using what he heard, it was an organization. And Naruto was involved. Easy. Second unknown factor Uchiha. How was Sasuke involved with Akatsuki? Last time he checked, he was trying to run away to join Orochimaru, one of the 3 legendary Sannin. Not some organization. The two shinobi started speaking again, and his attention shifted back on them. He's dangerous, and if he was able to defeat even you, Kakashi, then what could possibly do Naruto against him? Iruka sighed. Shikamaru frowned some more. Something was amiss. Sasuke never defeated Kakashi-sensei. He wouldn't be able to. So, the other possibility was that they were not speaking about Sasuke. But Uchiha, Sasuke was the only member left of his clan. No, he's not, he realized. Sasuke's clan had been completely wiped out. He knew so much, especially knowing that the dark-haired boy had called himself an Avenger since he was merely a child. As to who had killed all his family and clan, Shikamaru couldn't but guess. Maybe, another member of that same clan. That would explain the mention of a strong Uchiha, strong enough to defeat one of the stronger Junin of Konoha, the genius copy Nin Hakate Kakashi. But why would one destroy his own family? And why was Naruto involved in this? Don't worry, Iruka, Jiraiya will protect him, and with that, the chakra signature of Kakashi disappeared. A second later, Iruka's disappeared too. Quickly, Shikamaru dispersed his jutsu and headed towards the Hokage office, all the while, his brain going through the whole conversation. He wasn't going to go down without knowing exactly what was happening. He was a genius after all. He'd better start using his intelligence for something interesting. For once. End flashback. After this, he managed to gather a fairly good amount of information on the Uchiha family. It had been way too easy to enter in the restricted area that only Chunin and Junin were allowed to use. Because he was a Chunin after all. And no one supposed he would be interested in old, missing nins. And missing nins were still listed on the ninja registration book other than in the bingo book. Uchiha, Itachi. Genius. Shinobi at the age of 7. Got complete control of his Sharingan at the age of 8, promoted Junin at the age of 10. Enbu captain at the age of 13. He wiped away one of the strongest clans of all Konoha at the same age, disappearing right after. Shikamaru shuddered at the realization that this Itachi, being 7 years older than him, had started with the same high IQ. And he ended up surpassing any other shinobi in skills and strength. What if I were not this lazy? Would I have ended up like him then? He had thought. But he had dispersed that idea quickly. He knew that Sasuke was left alive and had his anger fueling up in order to avenge his clan, and it took him no time to make a connection with this, the strange power he felt inside the seal on his neck and Orochimaru. But then, Naruto somehow managed to calm this anger, if only a little. Ever since Sasuke woke up, after being brought back to Konoha, he changed. He allowed to be controlled, he allowed them to check on him anytime. And he was willing to show he wasn't going to betray any of them anymore. He changed, and they could see it. Okay, he was still silent, close and reserved, but now, there was something in him that made people around understand he was different from the old Sasuke. He trained every day, and slowly, the other genin started befriending him again even though he was still as stoic as usual. But at least, now Shikamaru could say he knew why he was this way. Anyway, after a while, Kakashi-sensei started training him again, showing once more that he was his favorite student. After satisfying his information need about Itachi, Shikamaru tried with Akatsuki, but this proved an unsuccessful task even for him. No one knew anything, and the few he knew that could help him were getting suspicious of his questions. But between the first 3 weeks and now, 2 years later, his attention shifted from Itachi, Sasuke and the Akatsuki to something else, namely Naruto. Why? Because he was perceptive. Shikamaru noticed the behavior of the villagers when the news of Naruto's departure spread through Konoha. They were clearly relieved, happier. So, he wondered why. He had never paid attention to the way normal people, and even some shinobi, acted around the blonde too much. He'd always dismissed it, thinking Naruto pulled one too many pranks on them. But that didn't explain it all. And having nothing else to distract him from his troublesome missions and him thinking how silent Konoha was now, even for his standards as said, he liked the silence until a certain degree. He started watching. Not just looking, he observed. Silently, he used the fact that no one bothered to look his way to observe, notice, and think. He had some kind of photographic memory. Not completely, but he used to register even the most unusual or insignificant thing to ponder on it later. If on the outside he was lazy and wanted nothing to do with physical strain, on the inside he was pretty active. His mind worked twice as fast as a normal one would, noticing things no one would, thinking in a different way, even looking at a determinate situation from different sides to have a better outlook at the results. So, he recalled the way the people looked at Naruto when he walked down the streets. It had been often he was with him, escaping from the lessons of the academy because they were too troublesome and boring, together with Kiba and Akamaru, and Choji. He was surprised to remember not just distaste in the glares sent towards the blonde obnoxious boy, but also hatred. Why would they want to hate him? It wasn't possible the cause were just his pranks, not even the time he dirtied the Hokage mountain. Feeling intrigued more than he had been while searching for Uchiha, Itachi, Shikamaru found himself searching, listening, observing, for Uzumaki, Naruto instead. What he found out now that he bothered to look, left him completely unsettled. And by the time the fact occurred, not even 2 months after Naruto's departure, he knew already too much not to make the connection. He knew already too much not to feel angry against the village in general. When it happened, of his generation he was the only one who understood the cause of it. When it happened, he was the only one of his generation that knew who was the cause of it. When Naruto's apartment was set on fire, he was the only one of his generation that knew it had been an intentional fire. Not an unfortunate incident. Of course the older shinobi knew. Tsunade Godem said it was caused by a gas leak, and the Chunin and the Junin agreed. But when Shikamaru stepped inside the remains of the house, seeing all Naruto ever had was now ashes, he knew this was no gas leak. Because, Naruto never had gas in the first place. At least, not in the late 3 years by the looks of it. He usually ate instant ramen, but he heated it up using a normal fire, not a gas one. There were traces of this. All the photos that were once on the table near the bed were gone, destroyed by the fire. He'd never really seen Naruto's apartment, apart this one time, when there was no apartment to start with anymore. But he knew there were photos of Team 7 and the other teams. There was even one of Sandame, and Shikamaru didn't want to know how troublesome it must have been to find that one. He remembered Sakura's face when she had stared around at the place, shocked to see it was so bare and empty. She had snorted saying Naruto must have taken away all his things when he followed Jiraiya. But Shikamaru knew he hadn't. He only had one backpack with him, too small to contain much at all. He remembered a flicker of knowledge in Sasuke's eyes, and the confusion in Choji's eyes. He remembered how shocked the others had been, and the sadness and rage in Tsunade Hokage's eyes seeing where Naruto lived. He observed, and was silent. Because, in the last month, he had found out why the villagers hated Naruto. Why the shopkeeper was grumbling about how happy he was that the monster won't come anymore in my market, and at the same time it was a shame, because now, I can't give him the expired foods anymore. Why they burned down his house. Why no one ever smiled at the blonde, or showed their care. Or spoke about him nicely because he had no parents. Because Naruto was the vessel of Kyuubi, the 9-tailed fox demon. The one that Yondaime was said to have killed at his life's price. It had been easy to find out, to be truthful. The hints were all around him, waiting to be picked up and examined. Naruto's birthday, the same date of the celebration of Kyuubi's defeat. The way people called him a monster. How he was treated by anyone. Shikamaru could even remember that he had heard most parents say to their children not to play with him because he was dangerous. His own never said this to him. Not the Hyugas, because he'd asked Neji about it in a way that wouldn't have the young teen suspicious about the questioning. But he knew Sakura's did, and Ino's, and others. Because for he villagers and some shinobi as well, Naruto wasn't the vessel, but the demon itself. That's why he felt guilty when he decided not to say anything to his friends. Because they deserved to know, but it wasn't his duty to reveal this. Tsunade's Shisho is in her office. I will go back to my training now. Sakura waved at him and walked down the corridor, disappearing behind a corner. Shikamaru groaned. He was again thinking too much. How troublesome. He couldn't stop thinking about Naruto, now that he knew. Not that he thought something different about the obnoxious blonde now that he knew that in his stomach was sealed one Biju-tailed demon, but now he was feeling bad he never offered Naruto some kind of friendship, when instead he had always acted as a friend, not caring what people thought. How painful could that have been? He'd been blind because he was too lazy, and he wished he'd have a way to show Naruto his friendship now. He knocked at the Hokage's door and received the permission to enter. Really, he could have just transported himself inside with a jutsu like others did, but it was too troublesome. And he hated to attract attention on himself. Opening the door, he found the Godem sitting at her desk, still as imposing as ever. Her blonde hair fell messily on her shoulders. This was a clear sign she'd been sleeping until a second before and she wasn't still wearing her Hokage robes. Sandame Hokage wore them, but he was the only one. As far as his interest in Konoha history went, Shikamaru knew Sandame had been the only one using those robes. They were unpractical and obviously fashionless. Of course a woman like Godem, for how decayed she could be, in her 50s would not want to wear them. "Did you request me, Tsunade-sama?" he tried to ask in a questioning tone, but as usual, the lack of interest and the fact that he'd been bothered in his moment of relax made his voice come out stressed and dull. "Hi, Shikamaru-kun," she replied, her voice steady and serious. Her eyes were looking at him in a way that caused him to stiffen suddenly, a dark sensation that something was wrong creeping onto him. "I need your help." As fast as he could, his hands moved, forming seals, one after the other, because in a fight, fast usually meant living another day. His opponent stood still some feet away from him, eyes fixed on the moves he was making, observing, calculating. Kaden. Karyu Enden. He swiftly finished the last two hand seals Uma and Tora and positioned himself in front of his opponent, right hand lifting in front of his mouth forming an O, taking a deep breath. Then, he exhaled, and from the chakra gathered in his mouth and in his fingers appeared a huge wall of burning fire, that went straight against his opponent. Crimson, swirling eyes stared hard, black bangs falling in front of his face. The other shinobi stared, obviously acknowledging the strength of the other, but shaking lightly his head. A crimson Sharingan and a normal eye stared hard at the younger teen that was his student, silvery hair messily sprouting around. "Still not enough, Sasuke." Kakashi yelled, and countered the jutsu with one of his own, Suijin Heki. All around Kakashi erupted a circular wall of water, protecting his body from the fierce fire, that vanished when it came in contact with the liquid shield. Sasuke brushed away a strand of black hair and bit his lower lip in concentration, his Sharingan swirling in his eyes, trying to find a way out. He was strong, but still not enough. He decided there was only one technique that could help him now, and he was about to start the hand signs when a flare of chakra's signature from his right. Kya. His reflexes were the only thing that saved him from the punch, as he moved out of the way a split second before the hit. The ground crumbled under the force of the hit, stones and ground flying everywhere as a tremendous vibration shook the whole area, and even Kakashi had to jump out the way to prevent the crumbling to damage him. Sasuke turned in a flash, and saw who attacked a flash of pink hair before another punch was aimed his way. He twisted in the air and formed some quick hand signs, but he wasn't fast enough as the punch barely missed his head. Renouncing to the use of the genjutsu, seeing a kick run his way, he clapped his hands together and, Kawarimi no jutsu, he thought. With a poof, he disappeared, the moment the kick hit. But instead of striking him, the kick crushed and destroyed a log. Sasuke landed on the crushed ground, wiping the sweat from his forehead, but he had no time to relax as Kakashi attacked again, soon followed by the pink-haired teen that Sasuke knew was Sakura. "Sasuke, you have to keep attention on your surroundings, you never know if there is another enemy hidden somewhere around." Kakashi's eyes showed his amusement even if his mouth was still hidden under the cloth. Sasuke growled, but knew he was right, and countered the attacks of both his opponents. "Kaden. Housenka no jutsu," he yelled. A set of small yet powerful spheres of fire were spit from his gathered chakra, another one of the favorite jutsus used by the Uchiha family. Sakura jumped out the way, Kakashi dodged and continued the attack. The three of them moved quickly, evading, punching, jumping and countering the moves and jutsus of the opponents, each one fighting against the other two, until the younger ones were both covered in sweat and panting. That moment Kakashi lifted his right hand. "That's enough for today," he said cheerfully. "Good job, Sakura, we are glad you decided to join in." Sakura smiled broadly and stretched, happy she had some time to spend with her Sasuke-kun. Her crush for the teen had somehow dimmed in the last years, even though she still had a soft spot for him. "I had nothing to do, besides, I wanted some training, and I wanted to be as far from Tsunade-sama as I could." Kakashi frowned at her. Is she again in one of her sour moods? He inwardly shuddered at the thought of her last sour mood. Tsunade-sama was really scary. Sakura shook her head. "I don't know really, she received a visit from someone of the Sanagakure and then she sent me to retrieve Shikamaru. I think she wants to send him to another mission." Sasuke raised one eyebrow. He's back already? I didn't expect him to be back before a week, he growled inside. That teen looked so lazy and all that stuff. Oh, it's so troublesome. Oh, it's so bothersome. And then he was faster than him. Are you trying to substitute Shikamaru as your rival since Naruto isn't here for you to show off with him? Some part of him asked smugly. That was somehow true. Since Naruto's departure, 2 years before, Sasuke found himself without an actual stimulation to become better. Okay, his desire of revenge was still fueling him, but he had quelled down his anger enough not to be bothered anymore by it. He'd tried to relieve this need for competition with the other available teens around Neji at first. But Neji had advanced even more, finally succeeding into becoming a Chunin at the next exam, and a Junin a year later. Sasuke was feeling left behind, and he knew this was all Naruto's fault. I want him back, so I can show him I am stronger, and I can finally get him back for our battle, he thought fiercely, a part of him the same, annoying part that kept nudging him about his lazing off, accusing him to hide the real cause of him wanting Naruto back to simply see the one that had proclaimed to be his first friend. Because really, Sasuke missed Naruto and his loud, annoying acting. And he feared deep down that the blonde had become better than him. He'd seen the glimpse of a power that exceeded his own, a power that didn't look human at all, during their fight at the Valley of End. He grew up in those 2 years. He was taller, stronger, and faster. His chakra reserves were bigger, and his resistance was higher. He'd trained himself until the ninja trusted him again. He'd taken the Chunin exams and had passed hell. All of them had, some at the first, some at the second. As he stood there, breathing deeply to get back some strength, one could see he was not the young, foolish revenge seeker he'd once been. His hair was still silky, but he used to keep it short since he resembled Itachi more and more as years passed, and this was enough to cause his anger to resurface. Now he was mastering the use of the Sharingan almost completely, but he did not keep it activated all the time, because he knew he had to learn not to rely on it. It was useful, but he knew he couldn't use it for everything that would become a weakness. He still wore the same clothes, with the Uchiha symbol on the back of his shirt, to symbolize his loyalty to his clan and to the village. He was not going to go down. He knew he had to train. But at least, he wasn't sacrificing everything in order to defeat Itachi. He had almost reached that point when he'd left for Orochimaru, but had been brought back, and now he valued that situation since it made him understand where his loyalties and heart were. If he were one day to succeed in defeating Itachi, he would be free, and still had a life to go back to. Hi, he's back. I often wonder where his lazy side goes to during missions. Sakura laughed as she and Sasuke walked back to Konoha. Kakashi looked at them before speaking. His Hite ate back again on his Sharingan. Don't underestimate the Nara, he said wisely. He knows when it's time to drop the acting and start working. That would have been better if he hadn't been opening his damn book again. Sasuke frowned. The title this time was different. He'd once thought about buying one of those books to see what was so interesting about them, but had chased away the idea, labeling it under the stupid random things that come into mind when I am tired list. Not to mention, the chuckles and blushes coming from his sensei prevented him from actually doing that. He'd come to the conclusion that this was some kind of porn book, but what intrigued him at the moment was that he'd heard somewhere around that the writer of those books was Jiraiya, the legendary Toad Sennin that was currently training Naruto. So, how come he had the time to publish another book if he was training Naruto? What kind of sensei could be this foolish? Sakura inside was having the same trail of thoughts, except she once read the first pages of the book and had found it stupid, absolutely pointless, shameful and horrid. Shanaru. Her inner self waved the fists around. That old man should train Naruto. Not selling these books for the generations to turn into perverts. The same, scary thought appeared in both teens' mind. What if he turns Naruto into the new pervert then? Both inner Sakura and inner Sasuke shuddered at the thought and glared at Kakashi. Kakashi, blind to the two's glares, waved goodbye and poofed away, his mind forwards to meeting his lovable dolphin. Sasuke groaned, refusing to slap his forehead in disgust. Sasuke-kun, what about having lunch together? Sakura smiled brightly at him, crossing her hands behind her back. No, he muttered, already thinking about the next training session. Sakura stood there, but the usual feeling of rejection was not there. She merely smiled a bit sadly, and waved at him walking away. Blank eyes stared hard at the training ground, not missing a beat. At his right, stood someone dressed in light, ugly green, with black short hair and fuzzy eyebrows. Well, less fuzzy than 2 years before, because the teen had grown around them, but still. The nickname persisted through time. At his right, someone he had never expected would be training with him at all. Same white blank eyes, same black hair, now of the same length as well. His cousin, Hinata-sama. She had grown up in the last years, mostly because she'd promised a certain someone to become stronger, the certain someone that walked away from the village with Jiraiya-sama. And she did, not just by training under the supervision of her cousin, but also by herself. Oh, she was still just as timid and shy as ever, but at least, now her true power was clear for anyone to see. She was a proud member of the Hyuga family. Hyuga Neji was changed as well. He was now keeping his hair tied in a low sash, being the one to care for his appearance, but the most noticeable change had been his mood and acting. After his performance against Orochimaru's servant, his uncle Hiyashi showed a care for him that went far from his usual. Maybe it was because of his first Chunin exam, when Naruto promised to change his clan's rules when he'd become Hokage, or the fact that for the first time in his life, he'd been sincere with him about his father. But the current head of the Hyuga clan was warmer than before. Hyuga traditions couldn't be changed by a snap of fingers, but his uncle managed to round some of them, and now the relationships between the main house and the branch house were less tense, due to the brotherly love that blossomed between Hinata and Neji. Neji couldn't still be accepted in the main house, but for sure, things were getting better. Inspecting all the space around him, as was doing Hinata, Neji was satisfied in the silence and concentration his team showed. For once, even Lee was silent. The fuzzy eyebrows also knew that this was important, and there was no need to rush over with the flame of youth. The Hyuga met Hinata's eyes and both nodded, the movement so light it was almost invisible. There was a flicker of chakra coming from their right, and it was fast, and there were more coming from various places around them. How many? Lee rasped out, trying with all his might not to yell out aloud. 2. The third must be still hiding around, masking his chakra within the nature, Neji replied. A smirk appeared on his lips. Let's end this neatly. Lee nodded and showed his thumb at him, then, not even a second later, he disappeared. No, not disappeared. He leapt, his inhuman speed that couldn't be rivaled once more helpful as he dashed towards one of the chakra signatures. A second later, the chakra signature appeared, and Lee was over at the same moment. Gotcha, he yelled, finally glad he could tune up his voice again. It was a dog. Distraction. Hinata yelled to Lee, and the taijutsu master twisted in the air again, hitting with a punch the dog, already spinning towards the second chakra signature as the dog disappeared with a poof. 2 more from the tree at your right. Neji called out, receiving a nod and a flashy smile from the black-haired freak. It was a good thing, Neji reflected as he moved to intercept a flying kunai directed at his head, that Lee was in his team. Although during their genin training and even after, in their Chunin period, he had been slightly pissed off by his acting, he couldn't but admit he admired Lee's fierce determination. He was identical to his sensei, Guy, but all the same, he was different, because not being able to use ninjutsu or genjutsu nor dojutsu, but that was understandable. He relied only on his practiced taijutsu, which was perfect under every and any aspect. After his almost death under the operation, by which Godem said he would never be able to go back to his ninja life, Lee never despaired. He kept on hoping and training, and in the end, after many similar operations, and help from allied countries and various medical jutsus, he was finally declared able to go back to his genin duties. He defeated even the many discouraging options that wanted him unable to fight ever again, and it was all due to his determination and love for the ninja way. He'd been told he would be accepted in the Chunin exams, but he had to crush his wishes to become a Junin, because the kind of power and strength and skills needed for a Junin exceeded the ones he would ever had. Relying only in taijutsu was not enough. And still, he was happy that way, because to him, keeping on his ninja way was already enough. Neji countered 2 of the kunai with his shuriken, before activating the second level of his Byakugan, facing the twirls of his opponent's chakra clearly behind the few trees and chakra walls he put up. Let's go then, he motioned to Hinata, who nodded and darted off to her right, whilst he took off on his left, attacking the unsuspecting opponent. To his dismay, the opponent was just another Bushin-turned dog. Leaping against it, he kicked it, and the dog-looking Bushin disappeared in a puff of smoke. Another distraction. Finally, the real opponent. He stood tall and proud after having blocked a punch from his sparring enemy, which at the time was the heir of the Inuzuka family, Kiba. The teen, still fairly identical even after 2 years, at least was grown up, and had major resemblances with the Inu enhanced senses, sharpened canines, pupil slits, agility. A very good sparring opponent, together with the one that was now sparring against Hinata, the bug master Aburame, Shino. Not even giving her cousin and her opponent a glance, he dashed forwards, attacking Kiba, who smirked with his bared fangs and countered the blow, for once not relying on his usual companion, that was busy forcing Lee around the place in order to disperse all the bushin. Seems like this time our trap set was effective, Kiba laughed, landing a blow that Neji stopped. But we were able to detect all of you, he replied in an even tone. Stiff like always, huh, Neji-kun? Kiba smirked, don't get all turned up by this, we still have some good card to play. On her side of the field, Hinata was busy fighting off Shino's bugs, that were his way to keep out of battle while at the same time fighting. Shino-san is good, she commented to herself, her eyes trying to find a weak spot in the line of chakra that was connecting the bugs to Shino's body and the one that was connecting her own with them. That was how Shino was able to enter her defensive shield last time they sparred. When the last bushin was destroyed, Lee did a victory pose and a flashy smile directed to no one in particular and moved to help his 2 teammates, now that Kiba's Akamaru that was now thrice the size he'd been 2 years before, and could no more rest on his master's head, had joined in against Neji. My great rival, I, Lee, shall help you with my flame of youth, he yelled, before thrashing into the battle. All 6 turned 3 against 3, Akamaru included, Kiba, the dog and Shino on one side, Neji, Hinata and Lee on the other. Lee put up his, I'm going to attack now, stance, the others prepared for the final attack. Then, all 6 stilled in the place they were. Lee slowly shifted his hands in his pockets, as did the others, in a similar way, like they were mimicking each other's move. Their stances slowly fell into an apparently relaxed posture, while on the inside, their muscles were just absolutely tense. If they could have looked below, they would have seen the shadows slowly sneaking to touch theirs. The sun was downing, and the shadows were visible around them. How troublesome, but then again, this was the only way I could stop all of you without having to yell, said a bored voice from their right. I will release you, so can you stop fighting for a moment? Hi, Shikamaru-kun. Kiba would have waved his hand at him if it had been possible, but in the current position he merely smirked pointedly at him. It's good to see you back already, even if that means I own Choji $50. If his status would have permitted him so, Neji would have sweat dropped. Instead, he curled upwards his lips and rolled his blank eyes, retracting the Byakugan. The shadow coming from Shikamaru's feet retreated, freeing them. Instantly their apparently slouched positions turned tense and they straightened up. Did you bet on my mission, Kiba? Shikamaru did the effort to grimace at the Inuzuka heir. How many days did you give me then? Knowing you, at least 2 weeks. I am surprised you only took 3 days, even for a solo mission. Shikamaru waved his hand. Yeah, he muttered, whatever. What are you doing here, Shikamaru-san? Hinata asked politely, fidgeting slightly. The only moment when she wasn't fidgeting was near her cousin or Lee, who obviously had enough boldness for both of them, and the entire village as well. Shikamaru's eyes turned cold for a moment, and none of the teens missed the tenseness in his stance, that vanished a second later. Something was wrong, or at least, something was bugging Shikamaru, and this wasn't normal for him. I need to speak with Neji. Tsunade-sama assigned me a mission and she said I would have to choose my teammates, he replied. Neji nodded, but felt imposed to add, but you're just returned, isn't it a little premature to send you in a mission already? Shikamaru sighed, not in this case. At least, Tsunade-sama wasn't angry at all, he muttered, scratching his chin with an absent expression. Anyway, please, Neji, allow me a few words. Whilst Kiba and Choji called the lazy teen with the kun suffix, because they knew him for a long time, and Hinata used san, because even if she knew him, she was being polite all the way, Neji never added a suffix, not because he didn't respect him, but because the two, despite their friendship during the last few years, came to respect each other in a way that didn't need any suffix. Shikamaru on his part added a kun, sometimes directed to any of his friends, or a sama, in Tsunade's random direction, but never bothered himself with suffixes most of the time. Kiba was a bit disappointed since Shikamaru didn't choose him, but waved his hand and walked away with Akamaru, muttering something about food along the way. Lee smiled at them and in a blink of an eye he was gone. The only sign he'd been there a trail of dust due to his speed. Hinata bowed to Shikamaru and slowly walked away, the practice having affected her resistance. Shino raised an eyebrow. He was being forgotten completely by the rest of them and soon was gone in the shadows of the trees. The moment they were gone, Shikamaru intensified his grimace and flopped down on the ground, huffing in distaste. Neji, raising one eyebrow, took a towel that was hanging from a branch of a nearby tree, Hinata's idea, and sat down at his side, waiting for the other team to speak. Despite him being a Junin, obviously of a higher rank than Shikamaru, Neji respected him and knew he would be a great Junin if he bothered himself with it. Tsunade-sama wants me to leave Konohagakure by tomorrow at noon, taking from 2 to 3 people with me, for a C-ranked mission, without a time period, the genius said. His tone was serious. C-ranked mission? Neji raised one eyebrow. That's strange. I mean, she usually gives you from low B to higher ranked missions. Shikamaru growled. It can turn from C-ranked to A-ranked if things complicate, he added. Neji was left speechless by this. For a mission to turn of a higher rank it was expected, but from a low C to a dangerous A, that was strange enough to let him confused. Why? What mission is that? Neji stared with blank eyes at the lazy teen near him. A research mission. I was assigned to find a person to deliver a message from Tsunade Hokage, he replied, eyes staring in front of him, not meeting Neji's ones. A nin from Sanagakure arrived this morning, sent from the case cage, and delivered some not too comforting news. Please, elaborate, Neji asked. Well, more demanded. I need you to agree or refuse before I am allowed to explain the mission, Shikamaru replied. Neji knew he was right, so in his mind he scrolled down the list of the information he received. A C-ranked mission, really low, but with possibility to turn up to A, searching for someone to deliver a message. The mission came from a communication from the K's no Kuni, which meant that maybe the Sand Village was involved somehow. It was not much, especially knowing there was no time limit to the mission. It could take days as well as weeks or even months. But all in all, he was bored to hell, since his last mission, a middle A-ranked one, had been a lot before, and since that one, he was patrolling the village and training. He wouldn't miss the opportunity, not even if it turned out a relaxing C rank. Sure, I accept, he stated. He also knew he would not be the leader of the eventual group, but it was okay with him, knowing Shikamaru's intelligence would let him decide what was best for the team. Shikamaru relaxed visibly, but not completely. Thanks Neji, the help of a Junin will be much appreciated here. So, what's this mission that is worrying you so much? Neji joked. Yes, he was stiff, but he could make a joke. Once in a lifetime, I've been ordered to leave Konohagakure to search for Naruto, he simply said. So, what's this mission that is worrying you so much? Neji joked. Yes, he was stiff, but he could make a joke. Once in a lifetime, I've been charged to leave Konohagakure to search for Naruto, he simply said. What? Neji lost his composure and stared at Shikamaru in deep shock. The lazy teen sighed and scratched the back of his head, thinking of the best way to explain the Hyuga about all that stuff. He himself had been not just shocked, but utterly stunned about Tsunade's request, but of course, the woman knew more than she let out, and she'd showed him so by telling him exactly why she'd chosen him of all people, and why she wanted him to find Naruto. She'd also asked him to gather people he could trust with his life and Naruto's because there was no time to lose with unknown shinobi. She needed the group to be fast and intentioned in helping Naruto, something not all Konoha ninja were willingly to do. That's so troublesome, but I understand, he thought. Start flashback. You need my help? Shikamaru repeated. Usually, the Hokage demanded something, not asked. She ordered her ninja to do a mission. She never started by telling them she needed their help. The creepy feeling in his stomach intensified. Yes, and you are the only one I can ask this. I'll tell you in a moment, and I am sure you won't refuse. She picked up a paper that was in front of her on the desk, and stared at it. This morning a ninja from Sanagakure arrived in a hurry, sent here from the case cage, and reported something that worried me. Shikamaru stared, waiting for her to explain. But Tsunade put away the paper, and locked her deep eyes with his, making him uncomfortable. There was something in her eyes that caused Shikamaru to frown. It was like she was telling him, she knew. But she knew what? I want to send you to find someone, and the level of the mission is C. She finally spoke, but her words surprised the teen. A C-ranked mission? Why? Usually she assigned him much more dangerous ones, not a simple C mission to find a person. A C mission? Why? He couldn't refrain himself to ask. Rather dejectedly, he'd expected something more since he had to renounce at his rest. Because you are the only one I can ask this. No one of the older shinobi would be willingly to accept a mission like this, especially since there is no time limit. It could take days, presumably months to be accomplished, and any person I could appoint to go would never accept once I'd tell them the person they need to find. Shikamaru frowned. If it was a missing nin, it would have been an Anbu assignment, and not his, especially since he was a chunin. No matter what Tsunade said, he couldn't accept junin missions. Tsunade-sama, I would like you to be a little more explicit, he demanded. Politely, but still a request. You have to find Naruto, Shikamaru, she said bluntly. Shikamaru blinked, then blinked again. What did you? Shikamaru's voice faltered. She wanted him to find Naruto? I said I want you to find Naruto, she repeated seriously. Your mission is to find him and Jiraiya and deliver them a message. But, he was still shocked. You are the only one that I can trust will accept this mission, Shikamaru, she said forcibly. I trust you with this. Shikamaru was silent as he rethought about what she told him. He had to leave the village to find Naruto, who'd been gone for 2 years, and no one knew where he could be at the moment. But the thing that bothered him at the moment was another. Why him? What was so problematic that Tsunade needed someone to get Naruto, and why him of all people? He knew that apart from a few people, no one would be glad to accept such an assignment, because they loathed Naruto for what was sealed inside him, but still, the younger generation wasn't supposed to know, and some of the older liked Naruto. Why him? Why me? He asked. I bet any other shinobi would be glad to go find Naruto. He didn't want her to know. He figured out the truth. Shikamaru, stop playing dumb, you are too intelligent for this, and I know you know about Kyuubi being inside Naruto. This time, the silence was stunned and absolutely discomforting. Shikamaru merely stared at her, eyes wide. The name of the 9-tailed fox demon lingered in the air, almost clutching the teen's throat. As he'd come to know, it was forbidden to say its name aloud, more so to speak about the fact that it was sealed inside Naruto. It was a matter of time you would figure out, Shikamaru, Tsunade sighed. With your high IQ it was obvious it would happen, and I am not stupid. Shikamaru blinked and looked away. You were the only one that figured it out, although Neji came pretty close to find out in the last few months. He's not dense either. Tsunade leaned her chin on her hands, staring pointedly at him. And still, you are worried for Naruto, aren't you? You don't think he's Kyuubi? Why should I? Shikamaru was staring at her in disbelief. Naruto is my friend, and he's not a demon. Naruto is not Kyuubi, and I am disgusted at the villagers' behavior. They burnt down his house, damn it. His voice was rising considerably, the pent-up anger finally overpowering his laziness. He never deserved such a treatment. Tsunade sighed and closed her eyes slowly. I know. I couldn't prevent this from happening. Her voice was filled with hurt, and the sight calmed down Shikamaru's anger. Then why, Tsunade-sama, me? Of all people, me? Shikamaru quietly asked. One of the answer was already before his eyes, because he cared, and because he knew of Kyuubi and wasn't affected by such knowledge, but he wasn't satisfied. Shikamaru-kun, what do you know about Akatsuki? The question left him baffled and unprepared. He hated the feeling, oh so troublesome. He was so stupefied of the question that he just stood there gaping, not even thinking about lying, or asking what she meant with that name. There, he was in deep, sheer trouble. She knew he had asked around and he'd searched. And he was supposed to be a genius? He couldn't even hide his attempts at unrevealing a secret. But of all, Tsunade was a Sanin, and she was the Godem. After all, she had to be smart. Shikamaru stuttered. Caught. He'd been caught. Damn. Mendokusei ne. I know the information about the Akatsuki are very poor, but this is obviously because it is a secretive matter and no one should know, so I'll enlighten you a bit, if you are willingly to listen. Tsunade stared at him. It was then Shikamaru dropped his acting. Point taken, old coot as Naruto was used to call her. 1. He was interested. 2. He wanted to know more, since his methods failed him. 3rd, he knew Akatsuki was after Naruto, Probably for the same reason that prevented the village from appreciating the blonde Kyuubi. That much was known. Fourth, he and Tsunade both knew he would accept the mission. Hell, Tsunade knew even before him. Because, Shikamaru, despite it being troublesome, missed Naruto and cared for him. That was the fifth point. So he slumped back on the seat, crossing his arms on his chest, and with a bored grimace he frowned at the woman before him. Women were so troublesome. Before closing his eyes, let's get straight to the point. Tsunade-sama, since you said there is no time to waste around. Akatsuki was really a troublesome matter to find information on, and I could gather only that much. Tsunade smirked. She knew she'd chosen well the person to send. As far as we know, Akatsuki is an organization of S-class missing nins from various villages, not just Konohagakure, but also Sanagakure, Kirigakure, Iwagakure and Kumogakure. Her smirk vanished. We also know Orochimaru once was in the organization. Shikamaru carefully hid his shock at the revelation, though his eyes widened slightly. The legendary Sannin had been into the organization. At the moment, all we know is that they are 9 and work in pairs. From what Jiraiya gathered through his journeys, before Naruto and him left to train, Akatsuki is after the Biju, the tailed demons that are sealed inside human vessels such as Naruto himself. Shikamaru listened carefully, listing all the information neatly in his brain, all the while searching and sifting through it to grab any detail that could be useful. If they want only the demon sealed inside, what about the actual person? He asked. Their plans are not known, they may kill them, or use them, we don't know, she answered truthfully. Although, I am edging towards the first option. Shikamaru nodded, and then something occurred to him. Gaara is one as well, isn't he? He does keep a demon inside him, just like Naruto. Is it one of those tailed ones or not? Tsunade raised one eyebrow. Yes, he is, and he's the vessel of Shukaku. Silence fell on them again, as Shikamaru processed the information. That means the Akatsuki has reunited missing nins from various villages, and now has the combined strength of them all, isn't this true? Shikamaru glanced at the Hokage sharply, which means, they want to extract the demons from Naruto and the others. Tsunade nodded. Something is wrong here. Shikamaru shifted through all he now knew, efficiently pinpointing what was out of contest. If they are after the demons, the vessels are of no importance to them, but if a vessel die, the demon must die as well. Tsunade nodded again, confirming he was right. Shikamaru breathed deeply. Then they must be sure they can extract the demons from the bodies of the vessels, and to do this, they should start from the weaker one, which has to be a one-tail. They would not risk away one of the strongest. Isn't Shukaku a one-tail Biju? And Kyuubi has 9 tails, but the Akatsuki is moving from him. So that means, either they are sure about the process, and have already extracted some of the Biju, or they are trying to lure the vessels to come willingly. He paused. That had been a long speech from him. Tsunade was staring at him, her brain reaching to the same conclusions in a split moment. Gaara is aware of the position he's in. It was him who sent the shinobi to warn us. She pushed the same paper she was eyeing before towards Shikamaru, who read it through once. It seems Gaara tried to put into the Akatsuki one of his shinobi, by labeling him as an S-class missing nin. He managed to get near the organization, but not enough. He was tortured, and was released in order to die in the woods. But he didn't, because he was able to return to Sanagakure, where he reported the members of the organization to have split in search for all the Biju. Shikamaru frowned. By the looks of the report, the man had been tortured through weeks, and when he arrived in Suna no Kuni, he died right after reporting to the case cage. He died because his insides melt while he was still conscious. He cringed and returned the report to the Hokage. This was serious, no time to play around. Akatsuki was dangerous, and if it were to abduct Naruto one way or another, it would be the end for the village. For all of them, how can I find Naruto? He can be training in the other world for all I know. He shifted uncomfortably on the chair. He'd accepted, there was no turning back, for how troublesome it was. Naruto needed him. Well, not him, he needed someone to warn him, and he was the only one willingly to do this. Most of all because now that he thought about it, all Junins had been sent over to the fight against Sound or similar. Even the Chunin were being sent over to higher missions, so there was no choice whatsoever. Jiraiya has sent me for the past 2 years a letter every month, though it has no addresser, so I couldn't send any reply back. You may want to have a look at the more recent ones. I received one 4 days ago. Shikamaru nodded, not the last bit surprised of the connection, because he knew that Tsunade cared for Naruto. He did not know what caused the woman to come back in the first place, since he heard she had disappeared for good years in the past not to return ever again, but he knew Naruto was responsible of this. Tsunade handed him 2 sheets of paper and Shikamaru scanned them. Jiraiya did not say anything useful enough for Shikamaru to understand where the two could be, this until he saw the style of writing change, and recognized it as Naruto's. He felt a light tug in his chest, recognizing the messy writing of his friend, and felt relieved somehow, to see something was still familiar, even if it was just the way he wrote and his hyperactive energy applied in letter form. Naruto was asking how his friends were doing, and he also said something about Jiraiya continuously doing research on the local onsen. After finishing the letter once, he restarted it, now searching for something else. There were mentions here and there, that alone were not informative, but together they could be helpful. Jiraiya saying something about the cold, and then, about having to buy warmer clothes. Strange, seeing they were in mid-spring. They must have been in a place that was cold even in spring. Another comment was from Naruto, who commented on the strange type of plants and flowers he wasn't used to see around, and that they were nothing like anything he'd seen beforehand. So he was not in the snow country, because otherwise there wouldn't have been flowers to start with. What was left out that could give him an indication of where to start? As far as he knew, the only other place apart snow country that was cold in spring was. They are somewhere around the Tsuchi no Kuni, he stated, placing the letter back on the desk. Being near the mountains, the climate is harsh but not like the one in the snow country. More so, it has different wildlife and vegetation than what we are used to, it would explain Naruto's comments. Tsunade watched him with a flicker of admiration, but he shook it off with a shrug. He didn't like this kind of attention at all. That's why he hid the fact that he was intelligent most of the time, except when in a mission or with his close friends. It was too troublesome to show off, mostly because he always received too many stares for that. Keep down and relax, life's good without complicating it. When am I expected to leave? He asked, feeling rather uneasy. By tomorrow at noon, you can take with you up to 3 shinobi you trust, and take with you supplementary soldier pills and permissions for the various countries. Shikamaru, you are dismissed. Shikamaru nodded, feeling quite betrayed but without knowing why. As he reached the door however, Tsunade spoke again, Shikamaru, I trust you to bring Naruto back safely. He did not turn. So troublesome, he replied. But the real meaning was another. I will. Tsunade smiled. End flashback. Now, to explain. Tsunade never said something about not telling his teammates about the contents of the mission, and by that, she meant it would be stupid to leave out the motivation for that. Besides, Neji was figuring it out by himself. Neji, what do you know about Naruto? He asked the Hyuga. I mean, really? Neji was taken aback. Of all the things he was expecting after being informed of the mission, that was the last one. He was expecting Shikamaru to further explain, not ask him such a question. His first impulse was to say that he was loud, blonde and smiling, but he knew this was not what Shikamaru asked for. He wanted a serious answer. And Neji knew better than the appearance Naruto put up, eventually. He is loud, and he's hyperactive, Neji started. But he looks like he's alone in the crowd. He stopped for a moment. I noticed it. I noticed the sadness that creeps in his eyes every time he feels the silence. He wants to fill it, even if only with his own yells. Shikamaru nodded. I noticed he's strong. I respect him because he taught me fate can be defeated, he added in a lower voice, looking at the ground. I owe him this much, he made me hope again. His life was considerably better now than it had been before, but the cursed seal on his forehead was still there, a reminder of his slavery. But despite this, Naruto always helped him through. He never let any of his friends down, and he promised he would help Neji. Not that anything was going to change just because Naruto said he would help, but the feeling of reassurance and security in the blonde boy's speech warmed him up inside. He'd noticed how Naruto had been banned and shunned from the village, but of his own he did nothing to help him while he was still in there, being too worked up on his own misery to take in Naruto's pain, and in their childhood he never spared a glance to the blonde, always listening to his clan telling him how he was dangerous and evil. Naruto wasn't evil. He was one of the most pure-hearted person he'd ever seen. Well then, if you want to repay your debt, this is the perfect moment. Shikamaru stood up and placed his hands in his pockets, feeling rather wary about what he was going to reveal. Someone wants Naruto. Neji cocked his head and raised an eyebrow, not quite catching on with these sudden changes of subject. Naruto? Why would someone want him, of all people? The sudden image of Sasuke appeared in his mind in a flash, but Neji willed it away. He trusted Sasuke now, just because Naruto trusted him. This was enough to Neji. I am sure you noticed that sometimes Naruto's chakra flares up differently. Shikamaru scratched his head and looked away. Like, in the very first of our Chunin exams? In the fight against you, of all people. The raven-haired teen's eyes widened, remembering the strange change in the chakra pulse. During that battle, he'd closed down all the pressure points of Naruto's body, so the blonde would not be able to gather chakra out of himself to fight, and still, chakra appeared from him, coming from his stomach. It was red, an angry red that looked like it was smirking at Neji, absolutely aggressive. It had happened in the past, but the memory was carved in his mind forever. I remember, his voice did not falter, but he wasn't this calm on the inside. That power Naruto has when he gets in difficulty situations, is what Naruto's enemies want. Shikamaru, though better than just revealing it all to Neji. But for how much I would want to bother myself into explaining you all of this troublesome crap, I have to find other two people for this mission. Once we are all together, I will further explain. Neji snapped out of his inner muttering and stared at him. Who then? Hokage-sama said I should bring someone I can trust with both my and Naruto's life. That's why I choose you, of all people, because you can understand him. He waved his hand to stop any unwanted question Neji would want to throw at him. I thought that gathering the old group 5 would have been fine, you know, without Naruto since he's the one we're searching for, but, he stopped. Neji stared, silently urging him to continue. I will list the weaknesses of the few people that could be useful, and we will try to decide our best. The white-eyed stared at him, blatantly confused. He mildly wondered what his own weaknesses were, and if Shikamaru had to think it over before coming to him. I have to be reasonable, Neji, and I need you to work with me on this. I need someone silent, that can take long running periods without being easily tired, and that can be trusted. Although the last one is obvious, Choji doesn't meet the first 2 points. He's easily tired in the long run, and he's not silent. I know about bringing Kiba, because his strength and the fact that he uses an ally would surely be a plus, but he's just as hot-headed as Naruto is, and we can't allow that, not with the enemies we will face. Neji listened carefully, taking in the information and nodding because he knew he was right. He was sure it was hard for Shikamaru to state his friend's weaknesses, but that was what a good leader would do. Decide the best to keep his team safe and strong. He knew why then, Lee would not be taken in consideration. For how much he was strong, there were still things he couldn't do because of his injuries not completely recovered, and the fact that he couldn't use ninjutsu and genjutsu. In the long run, he would only be able to fight raw and neat, but against chakra-related jutsus, he wouldn't be able to protect himself, and if his aches slowed him down, he would die. He stated this to the other teen, then he hummed, what about Ten, Sakura or Hinata-sama? A brief smirk flashed through Shikamaru's lips as he realized none of them was taking in consideration Ino at all. Her power would be useless in such an environment, leaving her bare to the opponent's attacks. She could enter in someone's body, but she couldn't use their strength, chakra or attacks. Plus, they hadn't the time to worry for the body she would leave unguarded. Shikamaru pondered over the 3 offered names for a few seconds. I don't know Ten enough to state I can trust her, even if you do, Neji. For what I know, her use of weapons that require distance can be helpful while ambushing, but not in close fights, where she would get hit before she can even throw a kunai properly, no matter the aim. More so, she's busy teaching at the academy. Neji bit his upper lip. This was something that had to be considered as well. Sakura is a strong point, I have to admit this, Shikamaru nodded. Her training with Tsunade-sama helped her develop an insane strength and she's also a healer. But, she gets distracted easily and her emotions often cause her to lose the sight of the subject. Neji knew what the other was talking about, and it was easy for him to state Hinata's own weaknesses, for how much he could feel guilty for doing so. Hinata-sama is still too unsure of herself. And even if she improved greatly by training with me and Uncle Hiyashi, she couldn't compare a skilled opponent, she still needs training, and she would get out of focus because of her affection for Naruto. Shikamaru nodded. But then again, who wouldn't? Naruto really was someone. Then, Neji almost slapped his forehead. Once again, they were forgetting someone. What about Shino? Shikamaru frowned. He had known Shino for a long time, and still, the silent teen was a mystery to him. But he had to admit, if he had any weakness, he didn't let them in the open. And his ability to command bugs would be useful since in the wild, such animals were everywhere. Plus, he knew he was feeling left out for the last time. After all, he'd wanted to take him, but ended up with Kiba because the Aburame was out for a mission with his father. In the end, who can we take? He mumbled. Neji frowned. What about Sasuke? Shikamaru froze. Damn, he thought. He had to admit, the Sharingan would be helpful, and Sasuke himself was strong, far stronger than he was. Plus he would go hell and back again to help Naruto. But, he's no option, he stated seriously. Neji was once again taken aback. He didn't like this situation at all. What are you hiding? Is Sasuke not worthy the trust anymore? Has something happened? He glared, and Shikamaru fought back the urge to step away from the raven-haired teen. Sasuke is trustworthy, and nothing happened, he stated. He was aware as Neji was, that he hadn't answered his first question, but it couldn't be helped. Not after what he found out about Akatsuki and Itachi. Trust me on this one, I will explain, when we are all together. He dismissed with a tone of finality all the questions and sighed. Me, you, Shino, for once, and of all the people we thought about, I think we are bound to take Kiba with us as well, Neji sighed. If you really don't want Sasuke in. Shikamaru nodded curtly, let's go, before someone else requires them for a mission. The first rays of sun lit up the still creamy rose sky as 5 figures stood near the gates of the village, each one with a little bag on their shoulders and some extra weapons tucked inside their pockets. One was slouching, but this was normal. He was dressed with long baggy pants that did not hang low, but were indeed fitting and would not slow him down in case a fight broke in. Instead of his usual net shirt and light jacket, he wore a plain black shirt with half sleeves, and had gloves resting in his backpack. Shikamaru had changed his clothes knowing he would need some extra warmth to fight against the cold of Earth Country, at least, the part of the Earth Country they were going. The second shape was standing tall and proud next to Shikamaru, black long hair tied up in a low ponytail so not to fall on his face, and he was wearing his usual turtleneck shirt with long sleeves, but had put up a pair of long, black pants due to Shikamaru's request of picking up something for cool temperature. The third was even more silent than the second one, half of the face hidden under the huge turtleneck of his black shirt and the other half hidden under a pair of round sunglasses. He cared nothing at all, but the others knew better. He was glad they called him. The last shape was crouched near the shape of a huge dog, patting him on the head with a smirk clear on his face. Contrariwise to the others, Kiba was dressed much the same as usual, not taking into account the possibility of cold. He simply didn't care. Neji's white eyes were fixed on the leader of the small group, waiting for him to finally explain. After speaking with him, the teens retrieved the other 2 members, finding them together eating at Shino's. The latter had been gloating, though he didn't show that since he'd been added in the mission, and Kiba just jumped around. None of them had been informed who they were going to find, but they would know soon enough. Meeting all together in front of Konoha gates, Shikamaru nodded at them and pointed towards the Hokage Tower, but before they could sprint to it to report the names of the shinobi involved in the mission, Shikamaru knew he would have to explain. Sorry Naruto, they need to know, he thought grimly. Now that you are all here, I have to explain properly the details of the mission, and I hope you won't turn it down after this. He stuffed his hands in his pockets, glaring at them, which were usual. You have to know 3 things. Kiba, Neji and Shino all stared at him. First, the person we are going to search is Naruto, he started. There was a flash of surprise in Kiba's face, but he hid it back again. Shino, well, he looked blank as usual. Why? He asked, his voice low but clear. That's the second thing. Naruto is in danger, due to a certain organization wanting his power, Shikamaru replied, glancing at all of them. An organization is after Naruto. Kiba made a face, his hands lifting up to wave around. That's something new. What did he do? Did he create trouble like he was usual to? The lazy teen shook his head slowly. The organization is after him for quite a lot now, at least over 2 years, if not more, he grimaced. Here we go, he thought, and prayed nothing bad would come out. He knew he shouldn't be the one telling, but he had to. They are after him because of the power he's the vessel of. Silence met this statement. Kiba frowned, looking at Akamaru who wailed, the meaning of what he said lost to all but the Inuzuka air. Shino just stared. Neji bit his lips, thinking about the choice of words. I know, Shikamaru continued. I figured out that in the last 2 years, and I did my research, that's why Tsunade-sama appointed me of all people for this rescue mission, and because what I think of Naruto did not change with this knowledge. I hope that once I tell you, you will follow my example instead of the one given by the village and the older shinobi of Konoha. Naruto is hated, Shino said clearly. He wasn't the one to speak a lot, but if needed, he would. The bugs told me his house was burned down by the villagers. Kiba gasped and Akamaru barked loudly, and Neji stiffened. That's true, Shikamaru simply replied. But why? Naruto is loud, but he never did anything to deserve the hatred of the people of Konoha. Kiba clenched his teeth in annoyance. I have to admit he's strong, despite him being a jerk and a loudmouth. Shikamaru sighed. It's not because of something he did, it's because of something someone did to him. For one who hated speaking too much, preferring short and less troublesome lines, Shikamaru was avoiding the argument. Let's try. Any of you know Naruto's birthday? The silence was his answer. So, was he the only one knowing? Well, apart his group, the adults and Hinata. So much about knowing your friends, he muttered, how troublesome. Indeed, so troublesome. It's the same day of the presumed death of Kyuubi by Yondaimi's hands. He looked at them. Presumed? Neji felt like a hand was closing around his heart. A deep feeling of dread sank in his body. All of them heard about Kyuubi, and even if some of them were not born yet, and others were only few months old, they all knew about the battle that ended with the death of both Kyuubi and the fourth Hokage. The fourth Hokage never really defeated and killed Kyuubi, Shikamaru stated evenly. He gave up his life but not to kill the demon. Neji paled. Now, all the pieces fell in place. He could remember what happened with Sandaime. What he did against Orochimaru was known among all the shinobi, the way he died to seal his enemy, but at the same time he couldn't properly seal him. Yondaime never killed Kyuubi. Yondaime? He sealed him into Naruto, he whispered, voice rough. Shikamaru was glad he hadn't been the one to say this. For how guilty he could be, he didn't want the burden on his shoulders. Cowardly, he knew it very well, but he couldn't. Yes, he replied. Silence. Neji simply stood there. Now he could finally understand the full impact of the words Naruto told him at the Chunin exam, the words that were carved into his mind and his soul. Now he could understand why Naruto felt involved in the curse of his family, why he felt as if he was looked upon not like a person, but a mere object. Naruto was strong. He lived with the knowledge he was the vessel of a powerful demon, of having his power inside him, and he was hated for this, and still, he kept on looking forwards and smiled. Neji sighed. Now he could understand. Naruto was like him, a prisoner of the village's beliefs and traditions and stupid laws and rules. They were treated like objects, weapons, just like the rules wanted to, but they were human beings, not weapons. Where were the fourth's beliefs? Why no one had protested against it? Why had they lived on, forgetting Yondaime's teachings and only remembering his skills and devotion to Konoha? Why had they insisted upon his sacrifices and created a hero when all he believed in disappeared with his death? Shikamaru saw the raven-haired teen's shoulders relax, and he knew what was going through Neji's mind, and smirked. Then he looked at the other two that were standing there, biting his lip. He knew they were Naruto's friends, but for how much he trusted them, years of misconception, distrust, hatred from the same villagers that had treated Naruto like a monster and caused the younger generation to consider him a monster as well were heavy to dismiss in a simple gesture. The village Konohagakure, but the others as well, Sanagakure first had their minds closed. They wouldn't realize they were mistaking, and were putting all the hatred and the anger on someone that was conveniently there, that by his nature would never attack them back, because he was too kind to do so. Naruto was the perfect scapegoat, and all of them knew. Sandaime had tried to protect Naruto, but not even the Hokage could watch over Naruto all the time, and the results were these: a secluded and abandoned teen, and a deep fierce hatred from the village. Shikamaru wondered once more if effectively Konoha wasn't rotten inside. For a shinobi that loved his home and vowed to protect it with his life if necessary, the thought was scary, and had he been any other person, he would have swiftly stepped back and forget that trail of thoughts. But he was he. He couldn't step back and forget. Because he was intelligent, and the hints were all there for anyone to see, and he did see. He was stupefied. It took him so long now that he could see the complex and intricate maze that was the village that any village was. Just like with Itachi. He killed his entire clan, except for Sasuke, but no one tried to stop him when he left. And Naruto was the vessel of a demon, but no one tried to understand or accept. When Sasuke himself went missing, who were the ones sent to retrieve him? A Chunin and some genin. Had anyone tried to help or stop the Hyuga clan from placing the seal on some of the members? No, because this was the best for the clan, and so, it was the best for the village. Vengeance was a bad feeling. But under the appearance, there was nothing. What was one of the basic rules of the ninja? Shikamaru knew it. To serve the village. To be a weapon. To be killed if that was what it needed to protect the village. Shikamaru felt a twinge in his chest. Strangely enough, since he knew the elders would never let a demon become Hokage, Shikamaru knew that the only one that really could change things was Naruto. Not even Tsunade could do anything to change how people grew up, the environment, the appearances, the soul of the village. Tsunade left the village herself, and she could not change things because she was old. Not as in age but as in, she was born in a different environment. She was born in that trail of beliefs, and even if she knew they were wrong, there was nothing she could do to change them, because they were part of her own life. Changing them would mean destroy the little stability she had. She was too old. That's why she too was relying on Naruto. He would become Hokage because he wanted it, and Tsunade would help, at least that she could do. Shikamaru sighed. He trusted Naruto. He would cleanse the old beliefs because he knew better. I don't know what to think. Kiba broke the silence and passed a hand through his hair, shaking his head slowly. This came unexpectedly and it's a lot to know. Shikamaru bit his lips. What if the mentality, the beliefs, were passed to their generation as well? What if Naruto is Naruto? Shino was standing still, eyes hidden by his sunglasses. That was all he said, but it comforted Shikamaru a lot. He knew what the bug wielder meant, and was glad. Yes, but I can't forget that he never even thought about telling us. Kiba stared at the ground, uncertain, Akamaru wailing at him. He has something dangerous in him, he is dangerous. We had every right to know, we were supposed to be friends. We had never been really his friends, Shino stated. There was a tone of finality in his words. Hell, he spoke more than he was used to. Shikamaru was afraid he would not speak anymore during their entire mission now. Because we let them think in our place. He pointed to the village with his hand. Some bugs appeared from under his sleeve and moved on his fingers, restless. That was the only sign. Shino was a little more upset than what he was showing. Kiba blinked. He didn't thought he had treated Naruto differently because the villagers treated him like scum, did he? If he scooted away from him because he heard all the bad things the villagers spoke when Naruto was not there, that didn't mean he was a bad person. He was young, how could he even think about doing something that would cast him? Kiba bit his lower lip so hard it started to bleed. He did. He let the villagers think for him. He let the villagers mess with his mind because, if he showed he was hanging around Naruto, he feared he would be hated as well. He came from a respectable family, he was loved by the village even if he pulled pranks similar to Naruto's, and sometimes, the two worked together, or deserted the academy lessons because they were restless. But all the while he'd liked Naruto. And still, he had never used to think of him with nothing but disgust, and only after being defeated during the Chunin exam had he started to admire Naruto, and change his idea of the blonde. He felt the villagers were wrong, but he had never questioned them about it, he had thought they were right. What was different now? He considered Naruto his friend. Naruto always smiled. He always looked like nothing could hurt him, but inside? How was the real Naruto? He had never been friends with Naruto. Not the real one at least, and not friends. Maybe now. But he wanted to change. He wanted to show that he was not one of those who thought Naruto was a demon. Kiba was Kiba and Naruto was Naruto. He was able to think with his own mind, and if he wanted to be Naruto's friend through it all, it was his decision to make. Go to hell all of you, close-minded people, he growled, turned to where the village was. Naruto is my friend, and I don't care the consequences. I'd trust him. To say that Shikamaru was surprised would be both an understatement and an overstatement. He was glad Kiba made up his mind, but he was kinda surprised he opted for the hard way instead of the easy way around. Maybe he needed to give more credit to the dog boy, after all. Let's go guys, I want to kick some fox's ass as soon as possible. Kiba smirked almost evilly, but the glint of amusement was still in his eyes. Shikamaru fought the urge to smile. He never smiled, it was too troublesome to move his facial muscles so much, even though he knew perfectly well that smiling moved less facial muscles than scowling and instead raised one eyebrow. So troublesome, he muttered. But inside, he was happy. He looked to the village, where people were living like nothing was wrong, like they were not falling deeper and deeper into nothingness, and scowled. He'll show you, he thought. He will show you how a real Hokage has to be. I bet he'll be even greater than Yondaime, one day. He returned his mind to the present task, but first we need to find him and try not to let him die, that would be way too troublesome. I wonder how he's faring and if he has changed. A white messy mop of hair peered from behind a rock, a light blush on his cheeks hinting his excitement for the present situation as a slow satisfied smirk appeared on his curved lips. He was standing above a small hill, staring down at the onsen that was right under his appreciative eyes, all the while scribbling something on his block notes, giggling here and there. Suddenly, a high-pitched yell broke the quiet of the onsen, a voice that was yelling on top of their lungs, "Look up there! There is a pervert spying." Jiraiya felt on himself the eyes of all the women in the onsen, and backed away from his hiding place in fear as all of them started running to him, fury on their faces. A second later he was running away with all his speed, knowing too well what would happen if the women were to get their hands on him. All the while a pair of blue eyes observed the sight with mirth and amusement, grinning madly from his spot on a nearby tree, completely satisfied with his prank. To know that one of the strongest ninja alive was being chased and hunted down by a mop of furious women was all too funny to pass out. More so since he would never learn he should stop trying to gather information in every onsen he saw. The figure let himself fall down fro the tree branch, dusting off his clothes, whistling as he walked towards the onsen. He knew he had some time before his sensei came back, and despite being the one who revealed his presence to the woman bathing, he hoped they would not hurt him too much. The teen sighed as he looked around, blonde restless hair gracing his face as his ocean eyes took in his surroundings. It was one of the few warm places he was in ever since he entered Earth Country, and that was saying something since most of the time the dry landscape was traced by harsh and cold winds. Right now, it looked like a mild spring in Fire Country, and that thought caused him to think about his home country. He had been away from it for so long that now he missed everything and everyone, but he still felt fairly weak no matter how much he trained. Will I ever be able to be strong enough to protect the ones I care for? It was not the only time he'd thought this. In the last 2 years, even if he'd improved so much, he still felt weak, compared to his sensei and other strong ninjas such as Orochimaru and Itachi. He trained and trained and trained, he forced Jiraiya to give him tasks and commissions, he forced the man out of his usual, researching sessions, to help him, and teach him like he was supposed to, but it wasn't enough. Would it ever be enough? The worst thing was that he missed his friends. The monthly letters Jiraiya sent to Godem never had a reply, mostly because his sensei did everything he could to hide their effective location in the vast world, so not to be detected if the letter were to be intercepted by Akatsuki. Naruto sighed. In 2 years, Akatsuki never appeared to claim his power. Not even once. And would not for another year or so. Why worry so much? So he whistled some more, banishing the thought of his friends so not to get sad, and walked towards the little village where he and his sensei would be staying for the next few months. He was there only since 3 days and he already liked that place, apart the onsen, that's it. Are we directed towards the Tsuchi no Kuni then? 4 figures were moving quickly from a tree to another, barely making any noise, and were not following a particular strategy to check their surroundings. They were advancing at a good pace, with Kiba in front of them, his huge dog even more ahead scouting. Akamaru had grown a lot in the last few years, but that was normal for a Inu nin of the Inuzuka family, at least until the complete maturity, and Shino in the back, his bugs buzzing around. Neji was the second, and he was glancing around to prevent any attack with his Byakugan. Yes, because by what I gathered, Naruto is somewhere in there, and he won't be moving for at least some months, Shikamaru replied, staring briefly at his partners before looking forwards once more. He stays some months in the same place, sending a letter to Tsunade-sama, then moves again. They were now at least 5 hours from Konoha, and during that time none of them spoke, all too busy thinking about the recent news on Naruto to really want to start a conversation. Shikamaru knew that despite accepting the truth, it was still hard for them to digest that a creature like Kyuubi was inside someone they'd fought with and against, and that now was revealed as an almost complete stranger in their eyes. On his part, the lazy teen only wished to show Naruto he wanted to be a friend for real this time, not just faking to be one. Shikamaru also knew the others would do the same. They just needed some more time. After all, he had a lot more time to digest the news. And still, something was bugging Shikamaru ever since they had left the village. He didn't know what, but something was up. Something important he was not taking into consideration, and he hated the feeling. He knew it would be important later on, but for how much he kept on thinking about what could it be, nothing came. Shaking away the feeling, he resumed his previous trail of thoughts regarding where exactly Naruto could be in the Earth Country, trying to think of a place where the Sannin would feel secure but at the same time where they would have an onsen. Obviously by what the letters reported this was a somewhat necessity. Being a good strategist, he'd spend all night searching through maps of the Tsuchi no Kuni to see how many onsen there were, and he'd reduced the possibilities up to 4 places since the conformation of the country usually prevented the villages to build a hot spring. Fortunately enough, rereading the last letter, Shikamaru had been able to further reduce the possibilities to 2, thanks to Naruto's babbling about the territory. It looked like the loudmouth was helping them more than anything else, and Shikamaru couldn't wait to see just how much the blonde proceeded with his training. It wasn't like they had all the time in the world to find the blonde, mostly because Tsunade-sama said Akatsuki was on the move, so he couldn't waste time going to the wrong place. Any wasted day could mean less possibilities for them and for Naruto. Now, what could be another important thing for Naruto? Guys? Shikamaru attracted the attention of the rest of the team, everyone wondering why he was smirking now. Any of you know if in the Earth Country there are good ramen stands? He asked with a joking tone. Naruto sneezed. Of course he couldn't know someone was thinking about him, so he wasn't aware of the extreme cliché of it, but… Well, Ero Sennin, what are we going to do now? He asked whilst inhaling ramen. After having waited for his sensei for half an hour, Naruto had seen the man limp to him, sporting a black eye and some wounds from the meeting with the women at the onsen. Jiraiya hadn't punched Naruto yet. He was still brooding for the reaction. Even though he had nothing to blame on the blonde, since most of the time he ended crushed by the women by his own fault, usually because he was too loud in his observing. Jiraiya stared, mourning at the waste of his money that was going down Naruto's stomach, and sighed in despair. Years and still, he couldn't stop the blonde from eating so much. But he had to admit, apart his absolute love for ramen, Naruto had changed, and in a good way. Jiraiya allowed himself to watch him, appreciation and guilt flaring inside him at the sight of what Naruto had become. He was not certain if the training had been good for him, at least not completely. Naruto felt weak and devoted himself to strict training schedules in order to become strong, but all the while still remaining himself. He was still a loud blonde, but he was becoming strong, he was maturing as well. His appearance had changed in those few years, and Jiraiya couldn't but feel a pang of pain each time he looked at his apprentice. He looked so much like… Jiraiya bit his lower lip hard to stop the trail of thoughts before it started. He didn't want to go down the memory lane, because he would end up depressed again, and he had to keep up his appearance. He didn't want to have Naruto worry for him. Because indeed, Naruto worried for his sensei, despite their bickering about hot springs and books. The white-haired hermit stared at the eating blonde, taking in that every day passing by. The teen grew into a fine young man. Blonde bangs were longer and wilder, reaching his shoulders in a messy mass. His blue eyes were piercing deep and relaxed, but at the same time hiding a sparkle of mischievousness. He didn't wear much orange anymore, preferring black, but still his shirt had a line of orange on it. He was tall, almost reaching Jiraiya's shoulders, and his baby fat was gone, replaced by a toned frame, not enough to call him built, but still. Naruto was growing into a fine young man. Despite the fact that against his toned frame he still looked rather feminine, but the white-haired Sannin knew he felt it was not enough. He could see it in his eyes, the feeling he was weak, the feeling nothing he could do was enough. Naruto had always been staring up at someone, fighting to be accepted and cared for, and the first and only person that had seen him for what he was Sasuke. Then, even his first friend had betrayed him, and Jiraiya knew Naruto blamed himself. He'd always blamed himself for things that did not depend from him at all. Living in the village, where people looked down at the blonde as a demon and not the vessel, the hero the fourth wished him to be seen. Naruto had grown to believe he was the demon everyone pointed him to be. No matter what his friends did, no matter what those who cared could do, Naruto believed he was the cause of the village's pain. Jiraiya would never give in and say that he could forgive the village and the elders' fierce opposition on Naruto, but the blonde had. Start flashback. Oi Naruto. Jiraiya stretched his back and scratched his belly, licking his dry lips as he wished he had more sake. What are you doing? It was around 7, and by that time of the year, the sun was slowly dripping lower in the sky, painting it of oranges and rose tints. Jiraiya had been napping for some time with his back against a tree, and when he'd opened his eyes, he'd seen the blonde standing silently looking at the sunset. Despite knowing the teen was a lot brighter and quieter than what he used to appear in the village, such display of stillness was unsettling at first, and the man couldn't but wish to break it. He felt inadequate by staring at him like this. His own brashness was just a cover of his seriousness, but seeing the same thing on his beloved student, he didn't like it. Naruto was still too young for that, and yet, Naruto did not turn, but the older shinobi could see his attention was also on him and not just on the sun. After a moment, Naruto spoke, and his voice was so low Jiraiya had to strain his ears to understand what he was saying. I don't want to go back, the blonde sighed deeply. He must have realized that his words were a bit confusing because he then continued, it's not that I want to run away or something like that, but, see, sensei, I like this. Training and moving around, seeing different things and learning everything I can, but still, I never found a place that is more beautiful than my village. Naruto this time did turn towards his sensei, and his eyes were sparkling with pride. If I compare this to Konoha, I feel like I can't go back yet, I am not worthy that place. He shook his head and laughed sheepishly. Jiraiya frowned. I don't know how you can say this, after everything the village is putting you through. You should hate it, but no, you love it. You're nothing but a sentimentalist, like, he stopped. That speech wasn't meant for this day. Naruto didn't seem to have heard him at all, because the blonde merely smiled and continued. I can't hate Konoha. They have the right to hate me, after all. I can't understand what's like to have the most precious thing taken away from you. I never had this kind of pain. Everything I hold close is still living and I can see them and talk to them and know they are fine. Jiraiya could see the hurt in the blue eyes, but did not speak, merely allowing the blonde to continue. They hate Kyuubi and me, because every time they see me, they are reminded of what they have lost. I can't hate them when I know I would do the same thing. He turned again, and he never saw Jiraiya shook his head, eyes darkened with grief. No, you would never do that. You could look at Sasuke in the eyes and still smile, even though he betrayed you. You would just smile to those that hurt you, and offer them your hand, just like you would have. End flashback. That was not all of it, though. Jiraiya felt guilty since part of Naruto's feeling of helplessness was his own fault. If he'd known that by telling Naruto the truth about who his father was would have caused him to feel even more inadequate, and bring him to deathly training schedules, he would have kept the secret some more time. Naruto had always respected the Hokages before and the thing he wanted the most was to become one of them, and more exactly like the one and only he respected the most the fourth. It didn't matter Yondaime had been the one to seal Kyuubi in him, condemning him to a life of hatred. It didn't matter to him that he was hated and despised because of him. He admired Yondaime with all his heart, and this feeling never vanished. Jiraiya was sure he could bet Naruto had felt, in a wrong and twisted way that couldn't be explained with rage, misunderstandings and resentment, privileged in knowing Yondaime chose him above any other baby. Jiraiya assumed Naruto wanted to feel just a little important for the burden Yondaime put on him with the sealing of the demon. Always trying to find the good side of things, this was Naruto. Now Naruto wanted to stay true to his word and at the same time live to the expectations he felt he owed to his father. Despite Jiraiya telling him he was his own person and not his father, Naruto still felt he was not enough. He wanted to patch things up, but doing this, he was breaking from the inside. Dying, disappearing in the darkness, not allowing himself to relax and slow down, and Jiraiya found himself useless, he could not help him. Nay, Ero Sennin, why are you staring longingly at me? Jiraiya was shaken out of his musings by Naruto's curious voice, and had to restrain himself from smiling at the sight of his fox-like face. After all, there was still Naruto there, in front of him. He was not broken. Yet. Nay, maybe you want some? Naruto widened his eyes, moving his ramen away from reach. No way. This is mine, not yours. He hugged the bowl protectively. Che, Naruto, I won't eat a bowl of ramen never ever again, not even if my life depended on it. The white-haired pervert shook his head as he recalled that dreaded day his hatred for ramen was born. After all, no one would be able to look at ramen the same way if he were to see Naruto eating it after a particularly hard training. Naruto scrunched his face in confusion, but the steamy bowl in his hands attracted his attention again, and soon he was eating soundly again, oblivious of Jiraiya and his strange moods. Answering to the question Naruto had previously asked, Jiraiya blocked the teen before he could order his 10th bowl. We will be staying around there for some time, maybe 1 month, and then move through the Earth Country and reach the Rai no Kuni, he explained. Naruto huffed at being halted in his eating but looked happy to stay some more time in this place, more so since the ramen they served in the stand was the best he'd eaten in the whole Tsuchi no Kuni. Then you are going to train me again? You can teach me that cool move you did while trying to escape from the hot springs at the borders of the Wind Country 3 weeks ago. Naruto looked excited as he stretched his back. Jiraiya's eyes hardened. No, I won't. He steeled his resolve when Naruto's eyes flashed with hurt. He could not let Naruto overdo himself this way. It was time he put a stop to his inhuman acting. This path was a deathly one, and the man was aware of that. From now on, for the next 2 weeks, I forbid you from training, and I won't train you either. He put up a hand to stop him from complaining. Naruto, your health is more important than training, and anyone could tell you're overdoing it. I am not, Naruto growled out. Kyuubi heals me at a faster rate, and he's giving me more stamina to endure the training sessions. You can't order me around. I have to become stronger. Jiraiya felt his heart clench painfully. He couldn't accept watching Naruto's soul destroying itself. Naruto, I can order you around, because I care for you, and I want you to relax. Overdoing your training won't be good for your body at all, especially after the fact, last month. Naruto flinched and fell silent. He could still remember what had happened a month before, and guilt started pooling inside of him. He nodded and looked at the ground, ashamed. Jiraiya sighed. He didn't want to use this fact against him, but Naruto needed to relax. I am not angry at you, Naruto, but I want you to rest. He ruffled the blonde affectionately and smiled at him. Understand? Naruto looked up and his eyes met his sensei's. He understood, but he still felt bad. Wakaramasu yo, he mumbled. Sasuke stretched his back as he walked slowly towards his house. It was almost 10, and there was a cool breeze flowing around, making his skin tremble slightly. With a sigh, Sasuke let his eyes trail on the structure that was the Uchiha compound. He hated that place, and even though he would never admit it aloud, he dreaded the moment of the day he would have to go back there. It reeked of dead and darkness. Not for real, because the stench of the bloody corpses of his family had been long since gone, but the mental one was still there. Sasuke only lately had started to understand what the Uchiha really were in the village, and how the Hyuga took their place in the hierarchy of Konoha. He had hated the village, point one of his uneasiness with Naruto that instead loved it. Sasuke found nothing good in a village that did nothing the day the Uchiha were exterminated, not even realizing the fact until it was all done and the responsible was far away already. How could that have been possible? The Uchiha were loved, and there were Anbu guards that were not of the family that were patrolling around the compound that night. But no one external to the family had been killed that night. Sasuke's hatred towards his brother, taken up to the maximum, was now controlled by his rational mind as he was determined in not letting petty emotions to ruin his life anymore. But still, he could do nothing but hate Konoha as well. In his hatred, something had changed. Why? Because he didn't want to kill Naruto. It had taken him a lot to admit Naruto meant something for him, at least as a friend, the closest one he ever had, and he wasn't keen to lose that kind of bond only to be able to revenge his family. What were the Uchiha? Underneath, for the first time Sasuke questioned himself about that. At Fires he had always despised any thought against his lost clan, because he felt guilty and dirty for thinking badly of his family, but more time passed and more his mind berated him for trying to delude himself. He'd grown into a fine shinobi, that would take the next Chunin exam and surely pass it, and he'd met death many times already. This was how life was in any ninja village. And as he proceeded further, he'd started seeing the signs of decay. He could see them clearly, and they disgusted him. What was the point of such things to happen? Closeness, hatred, disinterest, ignorance. The villagers worshipped the Hyuga and the Uchiha. But everyone excluded the new generation, that had come to know during their first Chunin exams, knew about the curse seal the Hyuga family put on the branch members, and they were okay with it. No one cared if some died. It could be because of betrayal or treachery. If this was the village that loved the Uchiha family so much, what was the truth behind the facade? If the village acted this way, and one of the two families that were so worshipped was indeed rotten inside, what about the other family, the one that disappeared in that fateful night of 14 years before? Sasuke had started to feel distrust towards what he'd always believed. He did everything he could to ignore and push away the feeling, because he felt like he was betraying his family by doing so, but he had to admit, he could not push everything away forever. He had to face whatever his family really was. He believed there was much more under the surface, and by doing so, realize he could not dwell anymore in the fake world he had created. Sasuke passed the main entrance of the Uchiha compound and again was thrown into their world. He could remember the nice woman that always waved her hand at him as he passed. He could almost see the man selling fish in his stand across the street. He was always speaking nicely with his father. He could remember everything, but every time he cringed away from his memories. The dreadful thought he'd tried pushing away was making itself known more and more often, and despite everything his heart said, his mind told Sasuke that his brother knew something he did not. Now that he was old enough to pay attention, he found strange some of the things his father did with him. He had tried to make him befriend many of his cousins, always saying Uchiha were better than any other family and that Sasuke were to stop acting friendly with his classmates. Because he deserved more. In his naivety, Sasuke had accepted it, but not liking any of his cousins and being always in his brother's shadow, he'd thrown himself into training. Now that he had no one to confront himself with, waiting for Naruto to come back so he could fix things when did sparring and showing off turned into fixing things, he could do nothing but observe. And what he was starting to see, despite the layers of deceit, was scaring him. What if the appearance was just that? What if the Uchiha family was indeed rotten inside, like their estates were now? He had to find answers, but no one was willingly to give them. Everyone loved that family. If he were to listen to them, he would never get the truth, but only the surface. He'd too been one of those, losing himself in praising his family. But now that he'd started to feel nothing was indeed fine and well with it, he'd forgotten even his hatred. The only thing he wanted was the truth. Sasuke blinked as he found himself in his house. He hadn't even realized he was there until his hands started to mess around the kitchen, preparing a cup of hot tea. His hatred was strong. He wanted to avenge his clan. He'd promised that long ago, and he would never go back to his promise. No matter what he would discover about the Uchiha. They had been his family, and they deserved his respect, or not. But the truth, only one person could tell him the truth. Only one. The same person he'd swore to kill. His older brother, Itachi. Before killing him, I want my answers. About the Uchiha. About our village. About everything. Sakura smiled tentatively at Kakashi, unsure about what she was gonna ask him. The silver-haired man was staring at her with his visible eye glinting, and she knew she had interrupted something and he would not be nice to her unless she had something really important and urgent to ask. Kakashi-sensei, I am sorry for interrupting your quality time with Iruka-sensei, but an indignant squeal could be heard in the room and Iruka appeared, lightly flushed and disheveled, but with a twitch on his left eye. I mean, it wasn't my idea, but Ino was worried since she heard Shikamaru has been put into another mission so soon and she thought maybe you would know. She wasn't afraid of what Kakashi would do to her, partly because Iruka would hurt him if he ever tried to hurt one of his students, so she smiled sweetly and cracked her fist. Sakura had been training under Tsunade. Kakashi had to be attentive on how he addressed her. Her strength was slowly but surely becoming alarmingly similar to her Shisho. Kakashi growled. He'd been enjoying his teasing with his lover, especially because it had been a while since their last meeting, but now he had to put everything away to answer his students' questions, even though he wasn't even supposed to know what Shikamaru had been ordered to do. I am sorry, Sakura, but I don't know what Tsunade-sama ordered Shikamaru to do. He mumbled under his breath. eyes darting to look at the delicious frame of his lover at his side. Sakura bit her lip disappointedly. I see. Sorry, but Ino. Kakashi rolled his eyes. Ino was bossing again, just like she was used to during the years she'd been in Team 10. He still could hear Asuma's lamenting tone in his mind for all the times he'd come to him, bitching about how his team sucked, smoking one cigarette after the other and drinking sake and beer with him. Kakashi knew the woman had her mind fixed on her teammate. No matter how much she bickered with Sakura for Sasuke's affection, she knew she would never get the Uchiha heir to date her, simply because that was a childish crush. Sometimes he wished Sakura would get over it herself, even though lately her acting towards the Uchiha had changed into a more friendly one and had moved on what she thought was an easier prey. Kakashi refrained himself from chuckling. It would be weird and suspicious. Ino was really blind, even after 2 years. Realizing he was spacing out, Kakashi stared hard at her student, waving his hand at her to shoo her away. Go. Now, can't you see we are busy? He flickered his eyes towards Iruka. The brown-haired teacher glared at him as the copy nin closed the door on her face. That was not very nice, he scolded the older man. Kakashi smirked under his mask, eyes glinting mischievously. I am never nice, unless it's with someone I like, you should know that. Iruka blushed hard and slapped him on the back of the head. Don't ever say things like this again. He blushed more as Kakashi's eyes sparkled with amusement. Or else, he threatened. Kakashi shook his head and leaned over to land a kiss over Iruka's nose, and then he rolled his eyes, motioning for the academy teacher to follow him. Iruka was pretty sure he would not be able to sleep that night. Naruto kicked a rock in his path as he sulked, moving around the village with a bored expression. His blue eyes were fixed on the ground in front of him, his mind deep in thought. It had been 2 years since he left Konoha to train, but he hadn't become as strong as he wanted, especially since his sensei didn't want to help him. Jiraiya was absurdly making him stall, and for the love of Kami he couldn't understand why. He wanted to train, so to be able to withstand the pressure the name of his father had on him, and the fact that otherwise he would not be able to protect those he cared for. So why didn't Jiraiya help him? He had every right to train and become stronger, because he needed to show to everyone, and himself, he could do something by himself. He had to get better. He had to, even though Jiraiya had every right to not want him around for a while. After the disastrous problems their last hard training had caused, not only to the forest they had been sparring into, but also to Jiraiya, Naruto knew he had to control himself. But even so, he could not restrain himself for an entire day, let alone 2 damn weeks. He would never grow strong. Naruto bit his lip hard, knowing he'd made a promise and he could not break it because it was his nindo. Jiraiya would not train him and he'd promised he would not disobey to his direct orders. He was tired. His body ached and felt heavy, but it had been like this for so much he could not remember a day he felt really rested and healthy anymore. What he needed was to sleep and rest, but he would never allow himself this, because he would slack off. He couldn't. Lifting his hand to brush against his face, the blonde could clearly feel the bags under his eyes. Sign he hadn't been sleeping well, but he was getting used to this. After all, Gaara never slept since he would give his demon a chance to control him. For Naruto, the lack of sleep meant more time to train and get strong, and even though he was tired of that, Kyuubi helped a lot, healing his body and restoring his chakra reserves and his fatigue even after a few hours of rest. He could not allow himself any moment to rest, because he felt it wasn't enough. He was inadequate for how much he could train, and now that he was away from the village everything was coming easier to him to learn. He couldn't shake away the feeling that he was getting nowhere. Damn, Ero Sennin, he cried inwardly. I need this. I need to get strong. I'll just stain my father's reputation, I'll never protect anyone. Naruto was unknowingly breaking under the pressure he was self-imposing on his mind and body, because he could not see his gains but only his failures. Everything was never enough for him. It was like a vicious circle, but he was blind to it, and was slowly sinking deep down, where he couldn't be reached. Naruto lost what little light he had, and was losing his brightness as well. He could not stop. He could not falter. He was weak. I am sorry, Ero Sennin. Naruto felt a tug of displeasure and guilt in his chest as he straightened more, ignoring his body begging for rest. I can't stop. I have to get strong, so I can make father happy. So I can make you proud of me. So I can protect my precious people. Brushing one hand through his unruly blonde hair, Naruto moved through the street, not really aware of what was around him, in his hurry to get as far from here as he could so that he would be able to train without Jiraiya sensing his chakra flares. Naruto knew he would be blessed this time because of the onsen of the village, and he secretly wished he could spend some more time calling the women in the springs out to beat the shit out of Jiraiya. He was so deep in his thoughts that he didn't even notice someone coming in his opposite direction, and as supposed, both collided against each other, both falling backwards on the ground with a startled yelp. Naruto blinked. The fall had rattled his body more than he would have thought possible. His frame was crying in pain for the massive amount of training he did in the last few days, without rest, his stomach asking for more food, since, despite his ramen, he didn't eat nearly enough food, the world spinning around him. Lifting his slightly unfocused eyes, he noticed he'd slammed against a young teen around his age, seemingly taller than him, with dark blue hair and unsettling indigo eyes. Much to his surprise, the teen was dressed as a shinobi, which made Naruto wonder faintly if the guy was in some kind of mission or not. "Hey, Daijobu ka? I am sorry, I didn't mean to bump on you like this." His voice was warm and friendly, and had it been in any other moment Naruto would have smiled back reassuringly. This was not another time. Naruto groaned in pain and tried to stand, waving his hand at the other as he pulled himself on his feet, wavering slightly now that his balance, as well as his concentration to avoid the tiredness, had weakened. Quickly he recomposed himself and watched the other teen, who was a little taller than him, blinking as he checked out if he could possibly be an enemy. It didn't look like it. "I'm fine," he replied and smiled at the guy's concern. "What about you?" "I wasn't really looking, so it's my fault." He laughed sheepishly, one of his hands rubbing the back of his neck. The guy's eyes widened and for a moment Naruto wondered why he was looking at him this way. Even after 2 years wandering around without anyone to point at him calling him a demon, he was still sensitive about how people stared at him. But in the eyes of the teen there was no hatred or distaste, just plain shock, so he assumed it was fine, after all. "You look like shit," the guy commented, raising one eyebrow at him. Naruto felt his temper rise. Who did this guy think he was? "Well, I don't think this is any of your business," he growled, moving out of the way with the very intent of walking away and start training. "Wait." The teen stared at him with what Naruto recalled as concern, and was surprised. Why would someone he just met be concerned about with him? "What?" He tried to glare at the blue-haired teen, but by the look he received back, this guy wasn't impressed. "You?" Both were interrupted by a very loud and distinct sound coming from Naruto's belly. Looked like his stomach wanted to be fed again. Naruto felt a light blush rise up on his cheeks and looked away in embarrassment, whilst the other just blinked in shock. Caught in such absurd situation, both teens stared at each other for a second before starting to laugh out, neither sure as to why they were laughing in the first place. The tension in the air disappeared and Naruto breathed deeply. Maybe he was really overdoing it. Not eating would hinder him more, so he could just take a bit to put something in his stomach and use it as strength for his training. "My name is Michiko." The blue-haired teen grabbed his hand and shook it, eyes glinting amusedly. "What about you? Should I call you Growling Stomach, then?" Naruto pouted and mentally slapped himself on the face. That was just one of his usually stupid actions he thought he'd left in the past. "Naruto, my name is Naruto," he shook his head in defeat. "This guy is a baka," he mentally added. A sparkle of interest kicking in, wondering whether that guy could be a worthy opponent for a spar, Naruto stared at the teen. "Are you a ninja?" Michiko smiled brightly. "Of course I am." Naruto's stomach protested again, and Michiko smirked. "Come on, I know of a very good place where to eat." The blonde wondered if he could just sneak away without being noticed and do a quick trip to the ramen stand he'd visited before, and then go train, but his hopes were crushed when the taller shinobi grabbed him by the wrist and started pulling him along. "Hey, let me go," he wailed, but Michiko merely tightened his hold and dragged him away. "So you're just wandering around for training with your sensei?" Michiko stared at the blonde in front of him with evident surprise. "How is it like to be trained? Is he a good teacher?" Naruto let out a small growl as he unconsciously put more food in his plate. He'd been dragged into a restaurant, and as he and the other teen spoke, he lost track of everything else and only thought about his extreme hunger. "He's a good teacher, I think, if you forget his perversion and his stupid twisted morals. But he trained the sensei of my previous sensei, and he's really strong." "Scion?" Naruto nodded eagerly, gulping down a bit of water. He goes peering in the hot springs we meet on our way, all because he has to take info for his perverted books. He waved his hands around, for a moment feeling a little melancholic at the sense of déjà vu, before collecting himself again. Machiko snorted. Sounds like a pervert to me. Alright. He stared with amusement as the blonde ate, before turning to his own unattended meal. He said I had to take a break for 2 weeks, Naruto muttered, finally stopping. But I can't. I have to continue training and get strong, to protect all the people I care for. But, you really look like you need to rest, Machiko said. Who do you think you will be able to protect if you die for exhaustion? Naruto shook his head stubbornly. What about you? Are you here for a mission? You look like a ninja to me. Machiko smiled and nodded. Yeah, I travel around with my team for a scouting mission. We have to protect this village and the neighbors from a band of bandits that are terrorizing around here, he explained, and moving a bit he showed his bag to Naruto, who could finally see the Hite-8 tied on its string. It was a Tsuchi Hite-8. So, are you strong? Naruto leaned over a bit, waiting for the answer. Well, I am a Chunin. I tried out with my group 2 years ago and managed to pass the exam. Machiko nodded proudly. Naruto's face scrunched up in thought. 2 years ago, was it held in Rai no Kuni then? At the other's nod he smiled. Eros Sennin wanted me to compete as well, but I declined. I wasn't ready to get into it. I heard that the exams held in the Hai no Kuni are harder anyway. My brother was into one, and he couldn't get over the second part, but then again, he isn't that good ninja. Machiko laughed teasingly, waving his arm around. My first try I didn't pass either, but that's because the exam was interrupted by someone attacking our Hokage. Machiko frowned, then his face lit up. I heard of the commotion. For a while the rumors of the death of your Hokage traveled around as the day's news. Naruto's face darkened a bit, but he knew it was the truth. Our new Hokage is one of the 3 Sannin. She's really strong, even if she has this obsession with gambling and sake. Naruto laughed a bit, feeling a pang of nostalgia for the woman. Did you compete in another Chunin exam after that one? Machiko asked. Naruto shook away the sadness and nodded. Yes, I took up the exam held in the Kais no Kuni, he grimaced, remembering just how easy that one had been in opposite to his first one. He was still thinking he wasn't worthy the promotion, because it had been just too easy for his liking. Since they didn't require the 3-person formation the Hai no Kuni one required, I was allowed in as a single. There was only a bunch of other Konohinin that time, but I knew no one of them. I think my friends just took the ones after that. Naruto hadn't known before that the various shinobi villages held the Chunin exams in a row, and that the requirements for each country were different every time. Konohagakure required a 3-man team to enter, whilst Sanagakure wanted single shinobi. There hadn't been a written part, much to Naruto's glee, and the fighting had been rather easy. There had been only one worthy opponent, and only 4 genin had been promoted that time. The blonde teen had asked Tsunade to keep quiet to his friends about his promotion, because he felt it was unmerited from him. He had never thought, not even for a moment, that his desperate and rigorous training could have been the cause of his victories and promotion. Instead he thought the Kais no Kuni Chunin exams had been far too nice on them, and felt disappointed. His promotion hadn't been celebrated either. Jiraiya went spying on women and then drunk himself to oblivion, and Naruto continued his training. So you passed? That's great. Machiko stood up. If you really need to train, you could join my team for the day. I think it would be good to have a different type of sparring partner once in a while, and our sensei won't mind, I am sure of that. Naruto's face brightened up. Thanks, he yelled, standing up as well. That's exactly what I need. Jiraiya and his promise were completely forgotten as he followed his new friend out the restaurant. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.